Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our fourth annual United in Sustainability Summit for Credit Unions. My name is Tom Kurian. I'm Program Manager here at UNFCU in charge of this credit union industry team. And we're thrilled to have credit unions joining us today from Vancouver, Canada, San Juan, Puerto Rico, and virtual locations all across the universe. Let me first by thanking Organization of American States, OAS Federal Credit Union for their collaboration once again and co-hosting this event. We'll be connecting with Carlos Calderon, OAS FCU CEO and President, directly from Washington, D.C. later on in the program. Whether you're just starting your sustainability journey or well along your way, our summit has really important information for everyone. Over the next 2 days, we're going to try to continue the momentum that we established from past events held at the UN headquarters and virtually last year. And right now, we're having this event against the backdrop of a major UN climate conference, otherwise known as COP26, and the social justice movements that have been occurring globally and here in the United States. And we've established this platform specifically for credit unions to share best practices on sustainability and corporate social responsibility. We've exchanged ideas from topics ranging from facilities management to procurement and staff engagement at previous events. And we're really looking forward to taking this network forward. We've created this United in Sustainability Network, and we're really excited to hear from you and gain direction on where we take this mission in the next coming months and years. During the summit, we encourage you all to ask questions via the chat. We will be sending out an email and sharing our LinkedIn group for follow-up connections and conversations. In the meantime, though, we do ask everyone to keep themselves on mute, keep their microphones on mute, and use the chat function for interaction with each other, just so we can minimize the ambient noise and really hear our really great list of panelists and experts. But definitely, you don't have to lower the volume on social media. We have our hashtag UIS Summit 2021. We would love you guys to use that and share your feedback and let other people know what you're hearing and the value of it. Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Yma Gordon, Vice President of Corporate Social Responsibility at UNFCU and Executive Director of the UNFCU Foundation. Yma, over to you.
Thank you, Tom, and good day, everyone. It is exciting to reconvene for the United in Sustainability Summit today. As Tom mentioned, my name is Yma Gordon, and I lead the Corporate Social Responsibility Initiative here at UNFCU. This incredible two-day agenda is a result of a lot of collaboration and hard work from our planning team, and is possible due to the commitment of our speakers, of UNFCU and OAS FCU's commitment to this critical cause, and to everyone's enthusiasm. We really appreciate your participation and willingness to continue a critical dialogue, especially during these uncertain times. Despite, or perhaps because of the pandemic, industry collaboration on environmental issues and social issues is now more important than ever. And as we convene today, the backdrop is daunting. I don't have to emphasize that to any of you. The global pandemic has affected every country of the world and has caused a dramatic, unfortunate loss of human life worldwide. The impact on public health systems, as well as economic and education disruption, will certainly have impacts for years to come. We will, however, rely on improving global markets and innovations in remote work and technology to help us as we acclimatize to the new normal. Corporate social responsibility, aka CSR, is the way that we as businesses engage with our social responsibility, engage with our employees and communities in which we live and work. Doing good, as it turns out, is also good for business. Our CSR efforts supports accountability to our members, employees, and communities to act responsibly in economic and social and, of course, environmental aspects. Here at UNFCU, we, like many of you, take this commitment seriously. Our pillars of CSR include our commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion principles, ending poverty through the UNFCU Foundation, and sustainability goals, of which UIS is a part. From recent studies, we know that more than 13,000 financial institutions in the US have adopted CSR measures, and for good reason. As we emerge slowly from the pandemic, data shows that consumers' expectations that companies continue to contribute to society are heightened now following the pandemic, and that brand purpose has a stronger impact on the choices made by millennials, Gen Zers, and others than it did in a pre-pandemic context. There is also new opportunity here. Innovative CSR trends can lead to stronger brand differentiation and the ability to attract and retain great talent that we rely on. CSR best practices now dictate more strongly than ever that our organizations invest time and resources in critical areas, some of which include purpose-driven employee engagement, increased transparency in terms of materiality and business practices and those impacts on the local environment, investment and further investment in green technology, local community and employee engagement, diversity and inclusion initiatives, and finally, an assessment of our environmental, social, and governance impacts, otherwise known as ESG. Undoubtedly, the road ahead is daunting, but we're up to this challenge. Collectively, we can continue to build proactive resilience against climate events and to continue to invest in sustainability. CSR can certainly be one of those effective tools in mitigating climate change. Financial services, including credit unions, also have a crucial role to play in the transition to a lower carbon economy. We can and we must push for innovation in sustainable financial products. We know that from our cooperative principles that credit unions already have embedded sustainability in our organizational DNA. This summit underlines a call to action. How can we collectively address some of the most pressing issues of the day and take on a leadership role amongst financial institutions? We also know that climate change isn't gender neutral. As 70% of the world's poor, women are disproportionately impacted by the ill effects of climate change. We must and can continue to include women and girls in the solution. Climate action requires continued investment in women and girls, and we recognize that the frontline knowledge that we possess is needed now more than ever. So today and tomorrow, we will explore why doing what is right on environmental and social issues can positively impact organizational growth, performance, and community engagement. Our inspirational speakers and panelists will share their views and perspectives. Just to give you a quick update on UNFCU's Global Sustainability Program, of which we're so proud, we concluded our inaugural 5-year sustainability goals. We achieved 7 out of 8 goals in 2020. Chief amongst those was to maintain climate neutrality, even as our membership saw strong growth last year. We continue to survey our suppliers on their sustainability practices and expect our suppliers to follow our supplier code of conduct. We adopted and published a human rights statement on our website, which you can find there. We're really proud of these efforts and look forward to sharing more of our progress on goals with you. In our recent impact report, we announced our next 5-year targets with 12 goals that align with 9 UN SDGs. As most of you know, the Sustainable Development Goals, known as SDGs, seek to transform the world by 2030. Among these are promoting affordable and clean energy, economic growth and equality, and to tackle climate change. Also, based on UIS Network's feedback, during the course of our program, we look forward to learning about sustainable investments and bringing innovative green products to market, as well as tips and strategies in starting out. Credit unions' inspirational stories on sustainability give us reason to hope for a better future for the planet and a better, more equitable world. You will be hearing from credit unions, as Tom mentioned, from California, Louisiana, Hawaii, and Puerto Rico on their resiliency and adaptation to the climate crisis. As many of you know, a major UN conference just concluded last week in Glasgow, Scotland, known as COP26. A lot of exciting things came out of the conference. It brought together member states, business and civil society, as well as academics, scientists, and concerned citizens. The aim of this historic event, which also saw the return of the US, was fourfold. 1, to secure global net zero by mid-century and keep 1.5 degrees, a critical measure to avoid climate catastrophe, within reach. Adapt to protect communities and natural habitats, specifically by protecting and restoring ecosystems and building defenses, warning systems, and resilient infrastructure, and agriculture to avoid the loss of homes, livelihoods, and of course, lives. Number 3, to mobilize at least $100 billion in climate finance per year. And fourthly, to work together to deliver on these goals by finalizing the Paris Rulebook and accelerating climate action. In a poignant speech by Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, she made an urgent call to action to act now, reminding us that 2 degrees is a death sentence too many. And I quote, "Try harder, because our people, the climate, army, the world, the planet need our actions, not next year, not in the next decade." It is my honor to introduce today's keynote speaker, Cassie Flynn, direct from Glasgow, to inform us about what just happened. Cassie is an internationally recognized expert on the treaty negotiations on climate change and provides advice to countries on developing and fulfilling their pledges under the Paris Agreement. Cassie serves as the Strategic Advisor on Climate Change to the United Nations Development Program's Administrator. She's the head of Climate Strategies and Policy Team and the head of Climate's Promise in 119 countries. She's also the creator of Mission 1.5 and the People's Climate Vote that used gaming to become the world's largest ever survey on climate action. Previously, she served as a senior advisor to the Prime Minister of Fiji as COP23 president. Before UNDP, Cassie was an advisor on climate change and sustainability for national, state, and local governments, international organizations, multi-billion-dollar companies, and civil society groups, as well as on creative projects in the film, television, music, and gaming industries. She will now brief us on COP26 and provide key insight on why credit unions' community impact supports the way forward and how we can localize the global UN SDGs. Cassie will be joined by Pamela Ignone, EVP of UNFCU. Pam is a true CSR champion within our credit union. In addition to her EVP role, Pam serves as the chair of the UNFCU Foundation Board and the co-executive sponsor of the UNFC Global Sustainability Program. Pam will join us to facilitate our Q&A. Cassie, it's great to see you. I will turn it over to you. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Yma. It is such a pleasure to be here. I just could not echo more what you and Tom were saying this morning about the state of the world and how we sort of start to grapple with this and the particular role that credit unions have in this challenge. And, you know, I have to admit, when I grew up, I was growing up outside of Seattle, and my parents, both teachers, were a part of the Washington State Employees Credit Union. And so I grew up around a credit union, and I grew up around this idea that as you were thinking about your financial future and as you were thinking about all of these ways that you were dealing with life, that you had a credit union that had your back and that had people that knew about what was going on in your community, and you could talk to them about that. And I'm a very proud member of UNFCU now, and I certainly have that same feeling of community. And I want to talk a little bit about that today, in particular, as we start thinking about how we make sense of the climate crisis that is before us. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I've got a few pictures for you. Hopefully can you see that?
Yes, Cassie.
Great, thank you. And you know, as was mentioned, I just recently returned from Glasgow. Glasgow was a very, very long meeting. It was 2 full weeks, and then it went over time into the weekend as governments were really trying to strike a deal on how we can take this next step when it comes to the climate crisis. And Yma, you mentioned these 4 goals that the COP presidency, the United Kingdom, had. And while we didn't achieve all of those goals, we took some really important steps forward. And it was really important because we know that we have to keep 1.5 degrees in sight. And this means that we need all hands on deck because the stakes could not be higher. We are at a turning point. And while we, at the end of Glasgow, we have something now called the Glasgow Climate Pact that takes some steps forward in terms of keeping us toward 1.5 degrees, in terms of helping to increase our resilience to climate impacts, we still have a long way to go in terms of helping countries to be as ambitious as possible when it comes to the climate crisis. But another key part of Glasgow that is really, really important is that we have so many people wanting to get involved. Tens of thousands of people showed up to Glasgow. You can see here, this is one of the protests that happened outside. They expected a few thousand people, and 100,000 people showed up. And this is really important because people are really seeing the climate crisis in real time. They are seeing what's going on around them, and they want world leaders to understand that this is not okay, and we want action, and we want it now. And this is really understandable because in many ways, the climate crisis is on our front door. You can see here some of the sea level projections for Miami that essentially wipe Miami out. You can see here pictures of drought in the Midwest, the wildfires in California, and this Category 5 storm that hit the Caribbean. These impacts are starting to really affect all of our lives, and certainly no one is immune from this. And across the United States, you can see here some of these impacts that are just starting to become a part of the news, starting to become a part of the way that we are imagining how the future is going to unfold. And this can be quite scary. It can be quite unnerving because essentially what climate change means is making the world a little less stable, and with the potential of making it a lot less stable. And it affects every single person in the United States and every single person in the world. So where does this come from? I wanted to give just a few words here on how we got ourselves sort of in this mess, and then what we can do to get ourselves out of it. And you can see here in this graph, you have the sort of global temperature rise, and you can see it here. And really what climate change means is since the Industrial Revolution, since about the 1850s, 1860s, we've really seen a steady rise of pollution being pumped into the atmosphere that has resulted in huge amounts of warming around the planet. And right now, we're at about 1.1 degrees of warming. Now, the Paris Agreement talks about keeping global temperature rise below 2 and ideally 1.5 degrees. And we're already at this 1.1, and you can already see some of these impacts that are happening around the world. And so what is going on here? What's actually happening as the world is warming? And something I like to talk a lot about is that feeling when you drive a car, for those of you who drive a car to work, or when you go to the grocery store, and you park your car in a parking spot in the sun. And you leave your car and it sits there in the sun for a while, and then you come back and you open that car door, and it is so hot. It is sticky, it is gross, it is, you kind of might feel like, whoa, and you need to open the car door for a while to let it cool off. That's essentially what we are doing to the planet, because the heat in your car has been trapped in there, and that's what we are doing. And all of those impacts you feel, the way that you might feel woozy, and the way that you might feel sort of overheated, that is exactly what's happening to the planet. And that's what's going on to affect these droughts, these wildfires, these Category 5 storms that we are seeing with increased frequency and intensity around the world. So we've been studying this actually for a pretty long time, and certainly right before the Glasgow meeting, a big report was launched from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC. And this report took 8 years to produce. It's over 3,000 pages, nearly 300 authors, and it analyzed the latest research on climate change. And it told us a couple of things that are really, really important. And one is that humans are the cause of this problem, that humans and our activities since the Industrial Revolution have caused this increased level of pollution in the atmosphere. And then the second thing that it told us was that these impacts, the scale of them is unprecedented. Some, even now, might be considered irreversible in terms of the ocean, the ice sheets, global sea level. We have really put in place a set of dominoes that are now starting to fall. And it means a lot of these impacts that, unless we take action quickly, are going to become more widespread and more intense. And this is a simple calculus behind it, that the more emissions that we put in the atmosphere, the hotter it's going to be for longer, the more unstable the world is going to be. As I mentioned, we're already at 1.1 degrees. And if we continue to pump emissions into the atmosphere the way that we are now, we are only going to lock in and intensify this trajectory that we're already on. We are now, the science is telling us that we have locked in a bit of this for at least the next 20 to 30 years. The time at which climate change unfolds is in decades. It's not in singular months or years. And so the choices that we make now are going to affect the children of this generation into the coming decades. And unless we make these sharp reductions in emissions, we will exceed 1.5 degrees. We talk a lot about sort of what it means to exceed 1.5. And in many cases, if the closer we get to 2, the more we are going to start to see the world change quite dramatically. So for example, one difference between 1.5 and 2 degrees is the loss of the world's coral reefs. That really by 2 degrees, coral reefs would become a thing of the past. And so you can imagine what the impact of that would be, not just on sort of the ecosystems and biodiversity in the ocean, but also what it means for livelihoods, the fishing industry, and all of the ways that coral reefs help to sustain economies around the world. Time is of the essence. When it comes to climate, the big enemy is time. We have to act now. The reductions that we make now, the ways that we start to transform the global economy, the ways that we start to rethink how we get our energy, how we get our farms and food operating, transportation systems, protecting nature, protecting people, and green economy. These are things that are so very important. And we have to be taking these big, bold changes now. We know what we have to do. We know the solution to this problem, but it's a matter of actually getting it done. Tom mentioned social justice earlier, and I was so happy to hear this, because certainly when it comes to the climate crisis, the impacts of climate aren't borne fairly, they aren't borne equally. If you are rich, if you are poor, if you are a man or a woman, if you are older, if you are younger, climate change will affect you differently. And in fact, we've already been able to see some of the ways that this has borne out. If a Category 5 storm hits a community, we've seen rates of domestic violence start to rise to the point where you have entire research now about the impact of domestic violence on women in the wake of a big storm. We've also been doing some research when it comes to kids. And you can see here in the bottom right, this news screenshot that how schools will handle, without AC, will handle the heat. This is really important. We have seen now that when the temperature reaches 98 degrees Fahrenheit, if a school does not have air conditioning, test scores go down. SAT scores actually start to fall quite dramatically the minute kids are feeling overheated within those classrooms. And then, of course, you can imagine the repercussions of that if a student doesn't do as well as they can on a test like the SAT, the opportunities that are available to them in the future may start to become more limited. So how do we do this? We know that this is a big problem. We know we've got a ticking clock with us, But this is where these sustainable development goals come in, and this is where you come in your particular role with credit unions. Because as we look at all of these SDGs, we talk about them as sort of big global dialogues, how we're going to alleviate poverty around the world, how we're going to reduce inequalities, how we're going to have peace, justice, and strong institutions. But the way that this plays out is through that level of community. That when you think about good health and well-being, yes, you may think about what that means globally, but you probably also think about what it's like to go to a health clinic in your community. When you talk about decent work and economic growth, you think about the jobs in your community and the possibilities and the opportunities that are or are not there. And certainly when it comes to climate action, we have these big global stories. We know about icebergs, we know about rainforests, but it is these wildfires that are on our front doors. It is prices going up of food because we aren't getting what we need because of drought, for example. Or the scary, scary experience of being in a Category 5 storm and seeing your community dramatically affected by it. The SDGs are local. That is how that we are going to start to make changes. And this can be really exciting. We can think about how we want to reimagine the world. And this is what the Paris Agreement and the SDGs are all about. And Glasgow, while it didn't achieve the leap that we needed, we did take some very, very important steps. And in thinking about how to completely redo agriculture, completely redo our transportation systems, protect nature, our energy systems, the way we build buildings, the way we design cities, this is all very, very important. And we are on the cusp of being able to make some of these big changes in a really impactful way. And this is where all of you come in. These tools that you provide, these sustainable financial products, the way that you're embedding sustainability into your organizational DNA, the leadership that you are showing, the sharing of knowledge, the fact that all of you are here talking about this is so critically important, because this is where this starts. It starts with all of you being able to help be the leaders in your community and to be able to start to make these motions toward resolving the climate crisis and being able to look out for the people that are experiencing this crisis in real time. And I'm so honored to be able to talk with you today. And I'm so thankful to UNFCU and OAS FCU for inviting me here, because I still remember, as I said, I still remember the moments that I had with my parents down at the credit union, and to be able to channel that sense of community toward the climate crisis is something that can have a profound impact. So thank you so very much. I'm going to wrap up here. And I thought that this was a good way to wrap up, considering we just finished Glasgow, and what if it's a big hoax and we created a better world for nothing, but oh look, we preserved rainforests, we have green jobs, we have livable cities, more renewables, healthy children, and how important all of that is if we just make these moves now. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Cassie. Hi, hello everyone. Pam Agnone, United Nations Federal Credit Union. I'm executive sponsor of UNFCU's Global Sustainability Program and a very proud member of our UIS network. Cassie, thank you so much for sharing your insights straight from your participation at COP26. And really, especially as a credit union member, second generation credit union member, it's really important for all of us to have you here today at our United in Sustainability Summit for the credit union movement. Before we begin our Q&A, I just want to invite participants who have questions, please use the chat function. I'll work to pose all the questions that are entered into the chat. And if with the time we have allotted, if we can't get to everything, we will certainly post some responses through the UIS network. So Cassie, to start off, you noted that the UN's 26th Climate Summit had a very ambitious agenda. And the new Glasgow Climate Pact kind of raised the bar, I would say, by working to prevent drastic rise in global temperatures. And as you said a couple of times, to achieve this, one of the conference's main objectives was to gain commitment around the world take action to limit the rise in global temperatures over the next decade to no more than 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, because beyond this, the risks of global warming become far more dangerous. Given that and all that you heard, what would you say are the three most important takeaways in terms of how nations would work together to achieve this ambitious goal?
Yeah, thank you so much, Pam. I think that there's a few pieces to this that are really important that we saw come out of Glasgow. And one is that we really saw a particular attention to resilience and a particular attention to adapting to these impacts of climate. That and even as Yma was saying, quoting Mia Mottley, the Prime Minister of Barbados, that this is a life or death issue. That you will see entire countries face really existential crises. And so this idea of how you support countries to be able to adapt to these impacts of climate is really, really important. And we saw a number of pledges being made as a part of this. We saw some increased funding. We saw some increased ways that countries are going to be able to collaborate on this. And I found that really important. The second thing that I think was really important out of Glasgow is this idea of the Paris Agreement rulebook. So we've been negotiating sort of the operational guidebook of the Paris Agreement for years, really since 2015 when the Paris Agreement was adopted. And this rulebook finally came to a close. These negotiations came to a close in Glasgow. And so it helps us to have all countries sort of be playing by the same rules, have them be sort of operating in the same way, so we can ensure that we're on the same path, using the same sort of metrics to be able to measure progress. And it's pretty wonky. It's very, very detailed. I think sometimes the media actually had a hard time making sense of it because it's so complex. But I think actually that's a really, really big a big achievement. And then the third piece of this that I think is really important is that there was a lot more effort toward inclusivity in terms of the Paris Agreement. And so what I mean by that is that we had created something as a part of the negotiations called an Indigenous and Local Communities Platform. And this is really, really important. It's not getting a lot of press in the world because you say you've created a platform and it doesn't really ring with a fancy headline, but it is really important because it means engaging all types of groups and communities in this effort under the Paris Agreement. And I think it's really, really important.
It's interesting, you mentioned the Paris rulebook and just the importance of metrics, consistent metrics, and using them to report out and to really understand the progress that everyone's making. Was there anything else important coming out of this Paris rulebook beyond the measurements that you could share?
Sorry, I think I was on mute. There's a number of pieces that are really important to this. And the way that when we think about this rulebook, there is an effort toward getting countries to be aligned with their national pledges. So one of the important things about COP26 was that countries were supposed to arrive with their national pledges on climate. And they have a very wonky term. It's called nationally determined contributions, highly negotiated term, and it's not something that sort of rings off the tongue, but it is a very, very important piece. And I would say it's the beating heart of the Paris Agreement. And countries were meant to show up to Glasgow with these pledges. And so far, we've now had sort of two sets of these pledges. And the way that countries start to assess how they make these emissions reductions, start to assess how they might increase resilience, this is all really important. And we see this sort of come out of the Paris Agreement, because right now we have all of these pledges. sort of like if it's a potluck and all of these countries are bringing a dish, they are all very, very, very different. They're different sizes, they're different shapes. And now we're starting to get them along the same lines, which is really, really, really important.
We have a question. The question is, how important is private sector engagement to driving political and governmental actions? And can we make meaningful impact toward these goals from the bottom up?
So the private sector is critical. Even when you take a step back and look at the level of emissions in the world, 70% of global emissions are produced by 100 companies, which is pretty incredible when you think about it. In the entire world, 100 companies are 70% of global emissions. And this is something where when you start to think about where the money flows, you start to think about where investment flows, you start to think about what types of industries are supported. And I think that we also saw this a lot in the wake of COVID and these stimulus packages, and what sectors were really supported in terms of these stimulus packages, and what sectors were sort of chosen as winners and losers in this. And this is really, really important because we can't address the climate crisis without the private sector. We saw a lot of commitments in Glasgow by the private sector. We saw commitments for reduced deforestation. We saw commitments from financial institutions. And I think the big challenge, the next challenge, is making sure that they are all robust, that all of these commitments are measurable, that they're not greenwashing, that they are actually something that is built on real commitment and real tangible results.
Thank you, Cassie. Melissa had a question, and it is, what results from COP26 did you find most encouraging?
Certainly, I think for me, the most encouraging was the Paris rulebook. This is the piece that is so very important, and it helps us all get on the same page, because something that's really important about the Paris Agreement is that it has a ratchet mechanism in it. And so essentially every 5 years, countries are meant to make more and more ambitious pledges. And we have seen actually, so the first nationally determined contributions, these first pledges that came out in 2015, they put us on track for about a 3.5 degree world. They were way off. Now, 5 years later, you add up all these pledges and we're on course for a 2.5 degree world. And so while we are still far away from 1.5, the fact that in 5 years, ambition increased enough to reduce us by a full degree, I find really encouraging. We still have a long way to go. We can't let up, we can't sit back, but I think it is really, really important that we've seen this ratchet mechanism in action.
Another question coming from Tom. Says, credit unions and other cooperatives are ideally positioned to drive climate-friendly community investment and development decisions. In what areas can we do more to collaborate across regions and nations to leverage our collective impact?
That's a really great question. And I think that, given that, you as credit unions, you know your community best. You know how, these challenges as they are unfolding. And I think, being able to really focus in on some of those immediate challenges that you're seeing, but then also sort of mapping that to the big issues of the Paris Agreement. So, for example, we know that we can't tackle the climate crisis without thinking about energy. How do we get energy in the world? And even in the Glasgow Climate Pact, there is a reference to phasing down fossil fuels. It was a bit of a controversial conversation at the very last minute of the negotiation. But this role of energy in our lives is so critically important. And then, of course, alongside that is resilience. Is how can you be more resilient to these impacts? And if all of your role and your leadership in terms of driving some of these investments into sustainable development, being able to think about things like energy and things like adapting to climate impacts I think will go a long way toward helping the Paris Agreement and helping the SDGs.
Great. We have time for just one more question, Cassie, if that's okay. You made the point before that, private sector and 100 of the companies are responsible for 70% of the emissions. Were there any discussions about new innovations or green finance or commitments to help fund adaptation for developing world who, haven't gotten, essentially what was committed to during the Paris Accord? Any news on that front?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. And this is sort of actually the opposite of Melissa's question about, what were the big things to come out of it. The big thing that didn't come out of COP, and I think that everyone was really wanting, was this discussion on finance. That developed countries had pledged $100 billion a year by 2020. 2020 came, 2020 went, and the 100 billion did not appear. And this is now a big issue. We will see this on the road to COP27. There's another sort of big finance goal that's meant to be on the table, and time will tell if countries are able to access that money to be able to increase their resilience to the climate impacts.
Wonderful. Well, Cassie, thank you so much. It's just terrific and insightful to hear from you, having participated at COP26. We understand from your message the call for big, bold changes around the world, financial institutions, credit unions in general. We will look to use the Sustainable Development Goals as a roadmap and a North Star for positive change, and looking forward to working collaboratively as credit unions do to make a greater impact. Thank you very much. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Tom.
Thank you, Pam. Thank you, Cassie. Really great conversation, so insightful, and really great to hear that we have second generation credit union members who understand the importance of what credit unions are and our role in the communities that we serve. Next, I'm really excited to introduce our panel on strategies for bringing new green products and services to market. Our moderator is Hui Wen Chen, Director of Sustainability at Spin. Spin is a micro-mobility company that is part of Ford Mobility, and she leads a cross-functional initiatives aimed at reducing emissions and enhancing sustainability at Spin in their operations and encouraging a general mode shift away from cars for short trips. Previously, she was the climate risk lead at Citi's environmental and social risk management team, and the ESG strategy and reporting lead for Citi's corporate sustainability. She led the development of Citi's first climate disclosure reports. She has also served as the North American representative on the UN Environmental Program's Finance Initiative, UNEP-FI, the Banking Committee between 2016 and 2020. And before transitioning to focus on sustainability and environmental impact, she was the impact analytics and planning officer at the Citi Foundation. We has had private work experience at both private and nonprofit sectors. She advised clients across various industries at Sagent Advisors and Mercer Management Consulting, now the Oliver Wyman Group. And she served as the program officer for the William J. Clinton Foundation Pediatric HIV and AIDS program in Beijing, China. She is a Harvard Business School Leadership Fellow and Associate Director at the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative, focused on strategic planning and business development. Who is also splits her time between New York and San Francisco, and received an AB in economics from Harvard College and an MBA from the Harvard Business School. Welcome, Hui.
Thanks, Tom. I'm very excited for today's session. Sustainable financing was a key topic at COP26 since it's recognized as a key enabler for achieving the Paris Agreement. To limit warming and to adapt to climate change, we know we need to scale green technologies and products, and that requires financing. We've got a great group of panelists here today who will share strategies for bringing new green financial products and services to the market to support their members on their sustainability journey. We've got Michael Spink, the Senior Vice President of R&D at Civic Federal Credit Union based in Raleigh, North Carolina. He has a background in strategy, foresight, cooperatives, communications, and marketing. Michael has an insatiable curiosity about our world and the people in it, and seeks various perspectives to help drive change. He is a member of the Association of Professional Futurists, a board member and former chair of the Cooperative Council of North Carolina, a member of the Filene Research Institute think tank, and a recent graduate of the Singularity Executive Program. Miranda Beale is the impact specialist at Sunshine Coast Credit Union in British Columbia, Canada. After many years in the nonprofit sector working on outdoor education, Miranda started her career in finance 10 years ago at Vancity Credit Union, a values-led, purpose-driven bank. From teller to lender, the marketing coordinator to impact specialist, Miranda believes in meeting members where they're at, ensuring everyone has access to financial literacy and banking services. She has a graduate certificate in values-based leadership and strongly believes that credit unions have a responsibility to create products, services, and programs that both educate and empower their membership to make choices that benefit the common good. Last but not least, we have Terry Mickelson, the CEO of Clean Energy Federal Credit Union, located in Englewood, Colorado. Terry has more than 25 years of operating experience at credit unions, including over 10 focused on customer service via branches, phone centers, and online mobile devices. Prior to her role at Clean Energy FCU, Terry served as Chief Operating Officer and Vice President of Internal Operations at 2 other credit unions, each with over $500 million in assets. Terry has been recognized for her ability to incorporate innovations that result in improvements in quality of service, as well as cost savings. We're really lucky to have them here. In the interest of time, let's kick it off right away. We'll kick it off with the question to Miranda. Miranda, Sunshine Coast Credit Union is implementing the SDGs into its strategy. Can you share a little bit more about your organization, how you're doing that, and how you're doing that? Where are you on your SDG journey, and how do green products and services fit into that journey?
Thank you. I'm calling from beautiful Sunshine Coast in British Columbia, although it's raining right now quite heavily, and on the traditional lands of the Sea-Shelt and Squamish First Nations. Sunshine Coast Credit Union is celebrating 80 years this year as a community credit union, which originally was founded by fishermen and loggers and other small businesses who came together to support each other because we were not considered bankable 80 years ago. Although we're only 40 minutes away from the metropolitan of Vancouver, you have to take a ferry to come visit us. So we're considered remote. And back then we were considered too risky to bank. So over the years, things have changed and our communities have grown. They've become more populated, more diverse, more services, and more competition. We realized that we not only needed to stay competitive in this market, but our own members, who are now almost 18,000 strong, are evolving too. And many have started asking how their trusted credit union is addressing social and environmental issues. They're also curious on how they can make an impact beyond just recycling. So we are responding to the needs of our members. The pandemic also accelerated this need too. So in 2020, we created our environmental social governance strategy. We use the Sustainable Development Goals as a bit of a framework, but we also realized that implementing all of these goals was going to be a huge undertaking. So we, as Cassie said, credit unions know our communities the best. So we narrowed our goals to focus on 6, based on the greatest opportunity we have to make an impact in these areas, as well as the greatest potential risk to our credit union and to our communities if we don't act upon these. So right now, where we are in our stage, we're doing a deep dive into educating both our employees, embedding our strategy into the organization, as well as finding risk and opportunities in our communities so we can address them through creating new products and services for our membership.
Thanks, Miranda. It sounds like Sunshine Coast Credit Union has come a really long way in incorporating the SDGs into its strategy, and we can't wait to hear more about where you take it. Michael, Civic Federal Credit Union is also implementing the SDGs, but with a really strong focus on equitable access to financial services and addressing poverty and sustainable communities. Why the focus on these specific issues, and how are you tackling them?
Anyway, hello everyone. Good to see you. Good to be here. Real quickly, I want to say thanks to the dreamers that probably 5 or 6 years ago were hoping that this thing could happen, and now you're in your 4th year, so that's really cool. And to the what look like 90 plus people that are still dreaming that we can figure this stuff out. So it's cool to be with those that dare to dream. Thank you. Going back, I guess I want to speak to like a little bit of the core of what got Civic going. We kind of spun off of, so to speak, off local government federal down in North Carolina. We serve municipal and county folks across the state. And when we were looking at what folks needed, and going back to that, as was already quoted from Cassie, that credit unions know their communities best. There was a couple things. We started setting up our headquarters. We went for LEED Gold. That was something that we saw local governments were doing across the state with their buildings, their libraries. So we made sure that we did the best we could with the building that we're working on, or were working on. And now we're actually working to see if we can get that to platinum. But a big thing that was important was that access and that equity. Now, North Carolina is a real big state. We often think of Charlotte and Raleigh and RTP, and these are all incredibly cool things, but it's very rural. And access to equitable or fair or even any financial services can be a little difficult. So Civic, and 2 days ago, it was 3 years old. We're probably about 2,500 members and chugging along. But when we were looking at that, we wanted access, and internet is ubiquitous in North Carolina. 95% of people can get it, but a lot can't afford it. And we didn't want to build something that was relying upon internet. So we wanted to be all digital, and we wanted it to happen on the phone. So you can do pretty much everything on the phone. And that was very important to us. So, when you get into some of the document transmission and applying for loans and such, it can get a little cumbersome. We couldn't go 100% app. We do have a web-based solution, so to speak, but it was very important for us people to be able to get it anywhere that they needed. And as time passes, we may have heard of things like embedded finance will be positioned so we can better use this to allow people to get to the commerce and the financial services that they need through that access. So we can full service on the phone. In 4 minutes, you can get through your application to get in there. So we really focused on that because that's what people in North Carolina really needed. And as you know, to bring those things to help with poverty, and there's a lot of things that need to be addressed on that front, but one of them was just opening that door so people could get a fair shake. Sustainable communities, and a lot of that goes to the jobs, which was mentioned, the real economy, the circular, trying to keep things in a more localized ecosystem was very important to us. So we're looking to work very closely with small business, the changing ways of small business, how things are a little bit different than they used to be, and they're more so than they ever were. Following the last couple of years. But there's a lot of different components that we've been using to try to build that. And real quickly, and then we can move along, is we wanted to again, going back to what the members needed. There's SDGs, there's 17 of them. They're all so important, but we can't do it all. We had to really look at what's important to our members in the communities across North Carolina, and what can we as an organization, what do we have the capacity, what do we have the ability to do? So we chose 4 of those goals, the number 1, no poverty, number 7, the affordable clean energy, 8, decent work and economic growth, and then the sustainable cities and communities. And I put together a group internally of all different kinds of minds from across the organization to help us figure it out. Because if there's anything we have to tell ourselves is we don't know exactly how to approach this. We think we have all the answers, but we need to look a little deeper, look under the hood, and communicate with those out there that really can inform what's most important to them and how we can make the greatest impacts. So everybody, thank you for being here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, Michael. Terry, Clean Energy Federal Credit Union is a leader in the market on solar lending, and you're teaching other credit unions to do the same. Can you share more about how your organization got started and what strategies and advice you have for getting into solar lending?
Sure. Can you all hear me first? All right. Well, thank you so much for having us here today. Clean Energy Credit Union was founded by a group of people who are passionate about promoting clean energy. We were very lucky to have an organizing committee made of people in the solar and clean energy tech market. That is something that we were founded on in 2000. Oh God, I think they started in 2005. I didn't join until 2006, and even before that, they were working on starting our credit union. They were having a hard time finding affordable financing out in the solar market, and so they found this one need for it, and they didn't want to go as a bank, and they wanted to be a cooperative, and of course credit unions fit in really well with what they want to do. It was just something that was needed in the market at that time, and I still think that it's not something easy to do to start a credit union. And they found it a little more challenging than they thought it would be. It took a few more years than we wanted to get it going. But we were looking back at our numbers back in, we started in 17, we got chartered. In 2018, we had 500 members and 5 loans. And we ended in September with 5,200 clean energy projects that we have financed, and over 4,000 members. So we've gained a lot in a very short period of time. There's a lot of need out there. We are a national credit union, online only, such as Mike said. It's finding that niche. We want to have a small carbon footprint. We also want somewhere where our people can invest in clean energy. On the other side, our deposits go straight to fund other clean energy projects. So that was also very important to our group of organizers, is that we don't want to divest from our mission and what we're doing. And you did mention that we partner with Inclusive as part of their learning on getting into the solar lending area. And I'd say my advice really is knowing your market. Mike did a great job in, same Miranda, it's knowing your people around you, your members. What are they looking for? It's more than just solar. Is it geothermal? Is it helping them insulate their homes? Is it, getting new windows and doors? There's clean energy is much more than just solar. And we do e-bike lending for people that, don't want to drive cars. There's, cars aren't great in New York City when you're trying to find a parking space. So e-bike makes much more sense. So we're doing a little bit more on divesting our own products into what else is out there. And then the other piece, and I'd like to talk about, is just teaching people about clean energy, because in some areas, I still think it's part of what credit unions do in teaching financial literacy. Is there is a little bit of a need on teaching people what clean energy is, and teaching them steps on going to solar.
Terry, so exciting to hear about the growth in sustainable lending at your organization, and for the reminder that it's not just about the creation of the products and the lending, that it's also about education to encourage adoption. So Terry mentioned that clean energy is more than about solar. So the question to the panel is, what other sustainable products have your organizations introduced, and how are you incentivizing members to be more sustainable by leveraging these products?
Is that for me, or
Is it for anyone?
is that for? Well, I would say that we do the solar, we do heating and geothermal systems, insulation. There are certain things you can do even before someone is looking to go solar, because solar is really based on your energy use. So if you can reduce your energy use, you may not need as big of a solar system. And I know me and Mike had talked about that before, is just that you need to really have that education piece. And I'd say that was one thing we really wanted to get to our members is how to go solar.
And we have an older demographic here on the coast, and we're 80 years old. Some are reluctant to change. So addressing that, how do we incentivize people to be more sustainable? You know, what's a really good incentive? Watching climate change actually happen right in your own community. This summer, we had 16,000 fires in British Columbia. A whole town just a couple hours away was completely wiped out. And while our province was burning, we here on the coast had such a horrible heat wave that we were in level 4 water restrictions, meaning people couldn't even water their backyard gardens, their food source, and small farmers couldn't even water their crops. This is their livelihood. And we were just days away of restricting our drinking water. So the temporary solution was gathering as a community. We donated funds for trucks of water and storage totes to get to farmers, ensuring that our local food source was secure. But it was so scary on the coast that it forced all of us kind of to take a good look and ask ourselves, what more can we do? And people felt helpless. And we needed to figure out ways to bring them up and give them some hope. So we're leveraging our expertise at the credit union and our products and services to help empower members so that they feel like they're creating their own solutions. We've revamping a suite of eco loans with better rates for things like rain catchment systems, which clearly we could use right now with the rain just pouring down, but also solar panel and heat pump loans and energy upgrades to homes as well.
I'd like to mention, Terry had mentioned, you know, not everybody needs solar and they're not all running out to buy an electric vehicle. I got to give a shout out our financial inclusion and community development folks. A lot of data. There's a lot of data out there about what's going on. One of the things that they dug up that was rather impactful, we like numbers in the credit union world, right? Energy burden, what it costs to heat your home or keep your electric going. And for, you know, the average household's about 3%. And at about 6%, it starts to become a burden to that household. And these folks uncovered county after county in North Carolina where people over 20% of their household income is going toward their energy bill. So what can we do? Like Terry said, tighten their house up, you know, some weather stripping and some doors will do amazing things for these folks, and save them a few bucks and allow them to, you know, feel a little bit of the burden off of their back, and have a better hope. I love the word hope, that really works, that, you know, give people, I can do this. We can do this incrementally together. And that's where credit unions really shine.
Great. So this is our final question before we open it up to Q&A. So if you have a question, please get your questions into the chat. For our panelists, what recommendations do we have for credit unions that are just starting their journey towards green products and supporting the SDGs?
Yeah, for me, I would say that, you know, really understand what you want to do, because you're probably already lending in this area anyway. It might be a home equity loan, green, home improvements, unsecured. People are funding these types of projects. So, you know, do some homework, maybe some surveys to your members on what they need, and then look at your area competition on kind of what they're offering. And then, of course, learn about the industry. Some people learn, and we do sell loan participations. And some people learn a lot from us from, you know, buying those types of solar loans. I know we're not the only ones that sell them, but that might be a way to look at how the underwriting and such is done.
I would say our piece of advice would be act with integrity, learn to walk the talk. Nothing is worse than organizations that are greenwashing. And it's so common these days. So for us, in order to offer products and services and address issues like climate change, we needed to ask how we're actually walking the talk. So, and what we can do to improve. We went through a program through a Vancouver company called Climate Smart, where we measured 2 years worth of our own carbon emissions as an organization. We set targets so that we can actually lower our own emissions. And then this was incredibly valuable because it taught us areas where we can improve, and it inspired us for future products and services that we can offer out to our membership so that they're empowered to act.
I think I'd like to add that, like, be honest with where you're at and what you're trying to do. And I look at things like this, what a burden to throw on the lending team, you know, to figure out how they should be doing lending. Mix it up, you know, mix up the brains in the room. And they'll also, you know, mix them up in discipline and age and race, diversity, however you can do that. Because they'll call you out on the things that you're not thinking of and that you're not doing. And that's where the greatest insights come, is when you're admitting, hey, we're doing all we can, and we realize we're not kind of living up over here. And be honest and open and transparent about that, because it's, as was definitely alluded to, if you're kind of holding some things off because you don't want folks to know, that'll catch you, that will come back to bite you. So just be honest and communicate. Tom had mentioned, what can you do to get going, to get people engaged? Communicate what you're doing. More people care about this stuff than ever, and by virtue of being at events like this, you're connecting with a grander network, and this is happening everywhere. So become a part of that.
So Michael was so proactive. He did my job for me, answering questions that come through via the chat. I guess one quick question before we hand it back to Tom. So the question is to the panel: are you surveying your members to determine sustainable products and services that are important to them? And are you reporting out to your membership on your efforts to be a more sustainable credit union?
Yes, so we send out surveys to our membership, and we have added in a question about whether or not this SDGs are resonating with them, or the impact is resonating with them. And we're gathering their insight and addressing that into our strategy. And then, yes, we are in the process of figuring out ways how to report too. We have a Salesforce CRM system, so we've created questions into our CRM that help us know our members a little bit better, so that we can figure out which SDG aligns with them too.
Yeah, that's all we offer, so ours is pretty easy.
Tom, do you want to add a last word before we hand it back to Tom? Sorry, Michael, do you want to add a last word before we hand it back to Tom?
One of my things as a researcher, surveys are a little weird. They have to be done really, really correctly. So in addition to them, talk to people. Get out there, have all your folks that are communicating and interacting, what's on people's minds, and just open up that door, because as we know, one-to-one conversation, such as it is today, is really a critical factor in finding out what folks are really have on their minds.
Great. Thanks to everyone on the panel, and back to you, Tom.
Well, thank you, panelists. Fantastic conversation. And really quite a great segue. Michael actually just brought up, you know, having some diverse thoughts in the room, and you know, it's a perfect segue into our next amazing panelists. So we're going to shift gears again. No more pun there, Hui. But we're gonna. There's been so many developments in the past year about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and I'm pleased to introduce our moderator for our next incredible panel, Cultivating the Power of Difference, Dr. Jennifer Esperanza, who is the Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Coopera. Coopera is a multicultural analytics and consulting firm based in Des Moines, Iowa. At Coopera, Jennifer specializes in culture change for credit unions and other organizations. She holds a BA in anthropology and linguistics from the University of Southern California, USC, an MA and a PhD in anthropology from the University of California, Los Angeles, UCLA. Jennifer spent 17 years as professor of cultural anthropology, conducting research and teaching about cooperatives, migrant communities, and economic development. She joined Coopera in April of this year, April 2021. Jennifer, welcome, and over to you.
Thanks for the introduction, Tom. It's my pleasure to serve as the moderator for this discussion. I have the pleasure of moderating a conversation between two leaders in the credit union industry who between them have made long-term and wide-reaching contributions to improving the goals of financial inclusion. First, I'd like to introduce Elena Giacomopoulos. Sorry about that, the pronunciation. Lena joined the World Council of Credit Unions in 2017, first as our corporate communications manager, and now serves as a program director for the Global Women's Leadership Network. Lena directs professional development programming, expands its sister societies, and promotes membership in the US and internationally. Prior to the World Council, she was part of the Board of Communications team at the Black Sea Trade and Development Bank, where she supported economic development and regional cooperation in the Black Sea region. She has over 25 years of international experience working in 20 countries in Western, Central, and Eastern Europe. Lena holds a master's degree in global marketing from the University of Liverpool and speaks Greek. She's a member of the International Society of Female Professionals and is also a member of the International Association of Business Communicators. Next, we have Victor Miguel Goro, who is the CEO of Coopera Consulting, a market analytics and cultural change consulting firm that engages organizations and prepares them to reach out and serve underserved market segments. He has over 25 years of experience working in international and cross-cultural environments in the private and nonprofit sectors. Victor is co-founder and chair of the Credit Union DEI Collective, an expanding group within the credit union movement devoted to furthering DEI, a shared cooperative principle. Victor is a first-generation immigrant to the US and was born and raised in Panama. And he came to the US as a Fulbright scholar, and he has degrees in international economics and Latin American studies from the University of Wisconsin. So I'll start off with a question for them both, and a few questions will be for them individually. First off, we can start off with Lena answering this question. What are some of the latest trends and developments in diversity, equity, and inclusion from your perspective?
Thank you, Jen. Good morning, everyone. And thank you to UNFCU and OASFCU for inviting us to be part of this discussion. I'm really been learning quite a bit actually this morning, listening to the comments in the previous panels. So really it's been a continuous learning journey. So thank you. You know, I'm here representing, you know, the work that we've done through World Council Worldwide Foundation, and more specifically through GWLN and what we've been seeing. And because our reach goes beyond, you know, the borders of the US, and our membership base, you know, touches a large number of countries and members all across the globe. There are different things happening in the US, and there are similar things happening in the US that we see, you know, internationally as well. And we can look at specific, you know, things that individual credit unions are doing. But I think I want to talk a little bit about the bigger picture things that definitely need to be doing. And I think everyone involved in the entire discussion around DE&I is constantly seeing that it is, you know, a journey, right? This isn't something that starts and stops. This isn't something that has a start date or an end date. And it isn't something that I think the credit union and the international cooperative system, you know, started a short time ago and is going to be finishing in a short time. And it has to start with a larger understanding and buy-in from the leadership teams all the way down in the individualized credit unions. People have to have a broader understanding. The teams have to realize, you know, that this is part of a bigger process to better serve your members, right? If everyone on your leadership team looks just like you, you have a problem. If everyone on your middle management level team looks just like you, you have a problem, right? You have to be representative of your membership base. And that's one of the bigger things that we want to keep seeing through credit unions internationally. Now, for, you know, our international credit union systems, like if we take, for example, Brazil, for one of the member countries that, you know, belong to the World Council, right? More than 50% of people in the country are Black, yet it's a very small percentage of the people in the leadership of one of our large members. So it varies from country to country. And one of the big things that we keep seeing is that the more diverse thought, just as the gentleman mentioned on the previous panel, right? The more diversity that you bring to the tables, all the way from the leadership, all the way down, the more different types of individuals you bring, the better it will be for you being able to serve your members better. Victor?
Everyone, thank you for having me. A big acknowledgement to UN Federal Credit Union as well as UIS Federal Credit Union for actually gathering us and really talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I have also a distinct pleasure to work with this great professionals, Lena and Jen, in my daily work. I'm an alum of the World Council as well myself. But again, I've been in the credit union industry for around 25 years, which is hard to believe. In terms of trends, what we are observing, and just keep in mind that I do wear two hats in this conversation. First, the CEO of Coopera, and second, the chair of the Credit Union Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Collective. And my perspective, at least from this panel, will be mostly about the United States. So in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, the topic is trending. Action is trending. These diversity, equity, and inclusion really is front and center at the credit union space. Why is this? Why is it trending? Well, especially for what's happened in the last couple of years, the pandemic, the racial reckoning that happened here in the United States, and that has really allowed or actually pushed the industry to look into its roots. And the roots and its mission really is twofold. One, to provide financial services and allow for financial inclusion, especially to the underserved and the excluded. And second, to allow for financial health or financial well-being for all consumers. So those two things actually are clearly linked to diversity, equity, and inclusion. The other trend that we're seeing is that staff, members, the general public is actually keeping organizations accountable and honest about their DEI efforts. So they don't seem as perfunctory, they seem as really sincere efforts. And as Lena say, this is a journey. This is something that's going to take a fundamental organizational change internally to actually take root and take action, especially when we have an industry in which the structure of power is 90% white in the United States, when the country is actually 42% multicultural. And within the next 15 to 20 years, it will be a majority country. And so in order for any industry, any brand, any organization to really be relevant to the public or to the audience that is trying to attract with products and services, they actually need to reflect that. I think there has been actually a recognition and an awakening in credit union that that's going on, and that we're very, very behind when it comes to diversity. And so that's the trend that we have seen, that action. Lots of credit unions are hiring actually chief diversity officers, or at least diversity, equity, and inclusion directors, because again, the push is there, the advocacy from the staff, from the new generations are there, and from the members. Really, they want to belong and they want to be served with culturally appropriate products and services. And if we don't have that diversity where those products and services are crafted, then we really don't get anywhere. This is what we see in terms of the trend. The other trend that I have been observing as a consultant for credit unions and also as the chair of the collective is that there seems to be a transition, that DEI is something that is nice to have, and it's something more now we must have, because it really goes to the relevancy or the future existence of the industry itself. If we want to be relevant, we have to reflect the communities. We have to foster an environment of in which people feel like they belong and they are valued. And so, everything is pushing us towards that. The last trend that I will mention is that the industry itself, the credit union land, the credit union family, everyone in the credit union space is coalescing and acknowledging that diversity is a trend, and an action needs to be taken. This is what gave the CU DEI collective its genesis about 2 years ago, and now we are united to really push for DEI in our industry. So I'll stop there.
Great, thank you. And what I'm hearing from both of you then is the fact that while I asked about latest trends in diversity, equity, and inclusion, you know, I think the underscoring theme here is that it's not a trend in the sense that it's temporary. This is something that's holistic, it's long lasting, and we really need to hold our organizations accountable for maintaining our focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts in order for them to be sustainable. And with that, I guess I'll also have Victor expand on this a little bit from your perspective. You know, the census data is showing us that there is and continues to be a seismic shift in our population's demographics. Victor, how do you use analytics, and how can credit unions be best prepared to adapt and thrive using this data?
The realization that if you don't use analytics to do deep inclusion is basically maintaining a credit union guessing as to who their members are. And a credit union actually should put their membership file through a process that allows them to see what percentage of the membership is Black, African American, what percentage is Asian American, what percentage is Hispanic, what percentage is white, Native American, because each one of these cohorts actually see the world differently. Really need different things from credit unions. And so the first thing is really not to assume that we know what market we have within our field of membership. And so that's how analytics really help, because analytics bring knowledge, and that knowledge really prompts action. When a credit union sees that, you know, they're in the middle of Los Angeles and 73% of their membership is Hispanic, yet they find out that they don't have products and services that speak to the Hispanic market, then there's that disconnect. So that's how the strategy to really do deep inclusion should be based not on assumptions, but on analytics and what you see within your field of membership. When you put that field of membership and membership file through an algorithm or through analytics that tell you exactly what cohorts you have.
Great, thanks. And Lena, from your perspective, women factor into each of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Can you tell us how WOCU's Global Women Leadership Network is taking action on the global goals, and how can credit unions in North America benefit from your initiatives?
Yes, thank you, Jen. Well, for GWLN, obviously, yes. I mean, we focus on SDG number 5, but yes, women come across all 17 of the goals. And we were fortunate this past year, specifically GWLN, we went through the path of conducting a survey actually of our membership base right now. For those that don't know, Global Women's, right, it's the initiative that was started in essence to assist women to advance to more leadership roles in the credit union space. And this was started in 2009. And at that time, the women that requested the initiative of our leadership team were actually women in South America. And they requested a safe forum, and literally and I'm using the quote safe because they wanted a place where they could comfortably come together and talk about the issues that were affecting them and how they could advance. And then fast forward to where we are today, the initiative has grown. It is inclusive of women and men, right? We can't do this work alone. We want to continue working together with our male peers. And this past year, we actually surveyed our membership base, and we conducted a set of 20 interviews of our leaders across the globe and compiled some recommendations of how more women could advance in the credit union space and the cooperative space internationally. And it was a document we put together called the GWLN Pink Paper, We for She, because it is all about we for she working together to be able to advance more women. And it looked at the issues that are affecting women and how they can advance to more leadership roles, and what those obstacles are, and what actually credit unions can do, and what actually women can do to be able to move forward. And so that's one of our direct deliverables this past year. I'm very proud of the project that we did. It was a very lengthy project this past spring, but I think more importantly, it looks a little bit at the percentages of, how many women are going forward, what parts of the world they're coming from, right? Because we see, if we come back again, data, Victor talked about, the research and statistics, it's so important, the data. And I feel like a lot of times in our space, we don't have all those numbers and we don't have that data together. And especially, if we go on an international scale for our World Council or World Life Foundation base, a lot of credit unions don't compile data based on gender, right? Which is a very, very difficult thing for us to do our work, right? In the United States, we do, but still there's more work to be done. So obviously the Pink Paper was one of the projects, but one of the other ways that I definitely recommend for our audience here, especially because we're talking about the US primarily, and I know we have participants from Canada as well, is I recommend for credit unions to look at, is there a GWLN sister society in your area? And what I mean by that is there a localized grouping of GWLN membership base? Because it's a great, easy resource for you to connect and learn from other GWLN members and learn from other credit unions and what they're doing in their part. And it's a great learning tool, and it's a great forum for education and learning. And the virtual element through the pandemic has actually magnified this and our reach and our scope, actually, because we are able to reach to more women, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just with the people in your area. And so I say connect with the one in your area, like officially, but you can join any meeting. It is all virtual, and it's a great way to get engaged and be exposed to many, many more people.
Great, thank you. And as Tom has written on the chat, please feel free to post your questions. We'll be taking them in a minute. Thanks for sharing the work that GWLN is doing, as well as Coopera, in helping credit unions better understand how to serve these populations that find themselves, underserved. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the power of partnerships to drive transformational change? Let's go to Victor and then Lena.
Our partnerships, it's actually intrinsic to our system, of our industry, our space. When it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion, I would say the creation of the CU-DEI collective really reflects the power of partnership. We know that diversity, equity, and inclusion is a fundamental issue for credit unions, and it really takes a lot of organizations, a lot of talent, a lot of time to actually create actionable things. And so about 21 organizations in the credit union system in the United States actually created what we know today as the CU-DEI collective. And this collective actually will help credit unions really get started on that conversation and being curious and on being aware of the need of data to actually have a strategy for diversity, equity, and inclusion. No one organization can do this by itself. And so, for instance, 21 organizations that go from Flynn Research Institute to CUNA Mutual, the World Council of Credit Unions, Coopera, Clarity, also so many other organizations in the credit union space, they all have something to add, to orient, and then to really lead the conversation on diversity, equity, inclusion in the credit union space. The African American Coalition, inclusive organizations that have been for decades working on what it's called today DEI, but really it's financial inclusion and financial well-being. Those are the things that I would say the power of cooperation amongst these organizations will lead Koreans to really get into deep inclusion. And we already have these organizations that exist, and they have the best disposition to orient, to take credit unions by their hand, to really realize their potential and take and leverage that beautiful business environment that we have of being financial cooperatives. That is one of our superpowers, being a cooperative, because we are there for a higher purpose, not for profit. We are there really to improve lives, to improve consumers, to build communities, and to develop everyone.
Okay, great, thanks. And Lena, and then we have some, questions coming in.
Yeah. Well, I really partnerships. I mean, it goes. I think it's in the DNA of the work I think that we do. Right. I mean, we want to best serve our members, right? And in essence, we partner with them, and our members are the ones that give back to us and help us do our work better. If we wanted to see it on a very broader scale, romantic level, right? But I mean, just for us, for speaking for World Council, right, and Foundation, and by extension, obviously GWLN, our partners, the organizations that we work with on, in an international level, we have a project that came to a close this year that we did in Senegal, which was literally about creating gender lens investing for women entrepreneurs in Senegal, right? And our partner was the credit union cooperative system in Senegal that was, in essence, they were reevaluating how they were preparing the products and services that they were giving to the women entrepreneurs. And they saw that there was an increase in the loans that came in. So it took a specific approach and the partnership with, and it's just one example, and there's an array of other international projects, right? So we need that partnership to be able to put forth our work on an international scale. And then as a result, obviously, the credit unions that are benefiting from them, the members that are benefiting from these projects also need the partnership back with us. So it goes two ways. And the work that is being done through the CUDI Collective is truly, truly amazing. And it's wonderful to see all the different types of industry partners coming and collaborating together. And I do hope to be able to see it on a much broader and grander scale outside of our boundaries eventually.
Great. Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Victor, for your insights. And the theme that's recurring here is collaboration, right? Sustainability and holistic. And so I really enjoyed hearing your insights, and we'll turn it over to Tom for the next panel. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Again, amazing conversation, and it's interesting. Jennifer, you mentioned that there's this kind of through thread of this conversation that is very organically happening. And we're going to turn to another really great transition into sort of our next panelist, right, on impact investing for economic and social good. So I'm going to introduce Lisa Hogarth, who's the senior editor of the Credit Union Executive Society CU Management Magazine. She's going to be moderating this really important panel. Lisa helps people confidently share with the world what matters to them most. And in addition to her magazine editorial duties, Lisa hosts this Q's podcast and coordinates the monthly CFO Focus on compliance columns. She is a leader in developing Q's premium governance articles and videos, as well as a collection on diversity, equity, inclusion. So again, another fantastic segue. Lisa holds a master's in journalism from Northwestern University. She joins us from Rochester, New York. It's great to see you, Lisa. We're grateful to have you here. Lisa, over to you.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Tom. And everyone, welcome to the panel. I'm honored to be the moderator for this session. I also want to thank United Nations Federal Credit Union and OAS Federal Credit Union and the United in Sustainability Network for hosting us today. I really hope the conversation today raises some really great questions in everyone's minds. And if it does, I hope you'll enter your questions into the chat at any time during the program, and we'll come back to them toward the end of our time together. Now, to get this kicked off, I'm going to introduce each of our panelists in turn and ask them to answer our first question. I'm going to tell you what the question is ahead of the introductions. The first question is this: what is a sustainability project that you're working on right now that really has your attention? And that you'd be really glad if participants in today's program reached out to you about afterwards. We'd all like to know how this initiative stands to impact your community and why you think other credit unions might want to consider doing something like what you're doing. Okay, let's go to our first introduction. While our session title is Impact Investing for Economic and Social Good, actually only one of our panelists focuses on investing in the traditional sense. That panelist is Rich Colavecchio. How'd I do, Rich? Colavecchio is something I practiced. In his work as the first vice president of investment management at one of our hosts, $7.4 billion United Nations Federal Credit Union, Rich manages investment operations and risk analysis for the credit union's $2.8 billion core fixed income securities portfolio. Before he came to UNFCU, Rich held mortgage portfolio and risk management roles at both Washington Mutual Bank and Mortgage IT Holdings. He earned a BSBA from the University of Hartford and is a chartered financial analyst. Rich is knowledgeable about how credit unions can find investments that do environmental and social good within the many rules and regulations that cover investments for federal credit unions. In fact, Rich wrote a really great article about impact investing for Qs back in April. In it, he talks about the potential for positive impact from both core investments and from special investments that are available when credit unions use such tools as charitable donation accounts and employee benefit pre-funding plans. I'll drop the URL into the chat in case anyone wants to see the article. So welcome, Rich. Thanks for doing the honor of being the first to answer a question.
Sure. Thanks for having me, of course, and happy to participate. Thank you for the intro. My group here manages UNFCU's investment portfolio, and we are regulated under the NCUA's Part 703 rules. Authorities given are primarily centered around government-related securities, including a wide range of agency and municipal securities that naturally provide a general social benefit both at the national and the local level. And to me, that's an important point that I like to point out and I like to frequently highlight whenever I can. That is that government and agency securities in general do good as they support citizens. However, one specific area that does interest us quite a bit, at least when it's available in the marketplace and when it's a good fit for the portfolio in terms of both interest rate and credit risk, are within the municipal sector, where some securities are specifically issued to support various impact causes, such as clean energy, clean water, education, healthcare, mass transit, affordable housing, just to name a few. Another area of growing interest to us are the green agency commercial mortgage-backed security area, which are also permitted for federal credit unions.
Thank you, Rich.
Sure.
One of the things I love about our panelists is that they bring so much expertise in several different areas. So I think you're going to get some broad perspectives on what credit unions can do in terms of investing for good. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to Melissa Malkin-Weber. As Sustainability Director for $1.5 billion Self-Help Credit Union and Ventures Fund, headquartered in Durham, North Carolina, Melissa collaborates and advocates to reduce footprint and increase mission impact through the financial products, operations, and buildings portfolio of Self-Help, which is a community development financial institution. Melissa led the adoption of greenhouse gas analysis and advises on clean energy finance, energy efficiency investments, and operational improvements, all with a lens of social equality. Melissa previously directed research for the Residential Energy Efficiency and Indoor Air Quality Program at Advanced Energy and advised clients in industrial pollution prevention at RTI International. Melissa earned her law degree from the University of Michigan and her master's degree from the UNC School of Public Health. Glad to have you with us, Melissa.
Really happy to be here.
Would you tell us a little bit in a few minutes about the communities you serve and about a project you're working on for your communities that you're really passionate about right now?
Absolutely. We are, as a CDFI, we work to advance wealth and ownership among communities that have been traditionally shut out of access to fair financial products. And so for us, working in environmental sustainability and climate is important because we see that frontline and fence line communities are worst impacted. And so the aspiration is to create products and align all of our investments in ways that match up with that knowledge. And you know, that's like a life journey, right? That's a big bite to chunk off. I'll tell you about something kind of wonky we're working on to move us in the direction of that alignment, and that builds on a experiment we started 3 years ago. We said, what would happen if we tried to figure out our carbon footprint? What would we learn? Would that be useful? Is that a good use of time? And so following the lead of some peers who graciously shared their how-tos and their spreadsheets with us, we built our carbon footprint, we figured out the carbon accounting, we built some data collection channels, figured out where the different data lives at our organization. And now we're able to use that carbon footprint for something that really matters to me, which is to create some organizational momentum and start building towards commitments to become carbon neutral as an organization related to our footprint. And that I think is and that resonates for our investors, which helps build the business case in turn. So we have one of the ways we know that is we've got a special purpose certificate of deposit called a green CD. And we have about $8 million on deposit in that instrument. And the folks who are members who invest in that instrument come to our annual meeting and they ask questions. So those are two really useful, voting with your dollars and voting with your Zoom time, telling our leadership that this matters to us. Interestingly, I'll share one last tidbit about this, is it turns out that some of our large investors, big banks who invest with us through Community Reinvestment Act compliance and CDFI investments, they're taking on carbon neutrality goals with regard to their investment portfolios. And guess what? We are their investment portfolio. So what they've told us is to get ready and expect sometime in the future, no date specified, to be ready to disclose to them what our operational footprint is, because they're going to need that to calculate their investment footprint. So again, that has helped build that business case that lines up with our aspirations and what we know is what the science is telling us we need to do.
Wow, lots of questions I have in my mind already for the first two people who have spoken. If you have questions, I hope you'll put them in the chat. For time, I'm going to move on to introducing our next panelist. Joining us virtually from Missoula, Montana, we have Paul Herendeen, Director of Impact Market Development for $854 million Clearwater Credit Union. Paul works on everything from making the credit union's facilities greener to its partnership for carbon accounting financials report, to looking at the social and environmental impacts of its mortgage, consumer, and business lending programs. Clearwater Credit Union is part of the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, and its mission is to be a force for good in banking, in the communities it serves, and in the lives of its members. Its vision is that by living its values, it will redefine the role that financial institutions play in building thriving, sustainable communities. Glad to have you here, Paul.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. We're working on a lot of things right now, which I'm passionate about, so I'll try and mention a few briefly. First of all, we have for several years been assessing the greenhouse gas impacts of our own direct operations, and we're always trying to drive those down. We have achieved carbon neutrality through the use of purchased offsets, but as was highlighted in the recent COP26 meeting, offsets like that really are a stopgap. So we're always trying to find ways to reduce our direct emissions and to do that in a way that also is sound financial management for our members' money. So that's one thing that we're always working on. The second is, along with self-help, we just completed our first assessment of the greenhouse gas impact of our balance sheet. What gets measured gets managed, and this is our first time doing it, so we'll look to bring that more into alignment with climate targets in the future, but for the first time, we just measured it, which took some doing, and I'm certainly happy to talk about that and to share what we learned with other organizations that would be interested in this. And finally, we're always trying to be a good financial partner for organizations in our market that are doing this kind of work. And that just takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of relationship building. And it takes a lot of creativity on our part to look at financial arrangements that maybe are a little bit outside the normal, maybe need a little more work to make happen. I think one of the areas that we're working on right now that's really of interest to us is affordable housing. As with a lot of places, we're really facing an affordable housing crisis in Montana, all parts of it, and that ties together so many parts of this social and environmental impact. The lack of affordable housing is really a drag on people's personal balance sheets, and then the climate impact is significant as well. As housing in the urban centers and near jobs becomes increasingly unaffordable, people are pushed out, and the impact of their commuting starts to dominate the greenhouse gas output of their home and their life. So we are always looking to work with partners to do whatever we can to promote affordable housing. And that's certainly a tough nut to crack. And I'm happy to talk about where we found success and where we found challenges with that.
Thank you, Paul. Next up is Ben Jansen, whose work as Director of Values Integration at 1.7 billion Canadian dollars, that's about 1.4 billion US dollars, Kindred Credit Union in Ontario, Canada, focuses on the development of programs, products, and services that inspire peaceful, just, and prosperous communities. At Kindred, Ben's leadership has contributed to the credit union becoming a certified B Corp, joining the Global Alliance for Banking on Values, a living wage employer, a solar power generator, a provider of new accounts for refugees, and the first financial institution in Canada to offer all its guaranteed investment certificates as socially responsible investments. He also serves as co-chair of the Canadian Credit Union Association's Community Impact Committee. Thanks for being here today, Ben.
Thank you. Yeah, delight to be here.
I'm really interested in hearing what projects you're passionate about right now and why you think other credit unions might want to do something similar.
Yeah, so I'm going to share a little bit about that. One of the last pieces, which was around guaranteed investment certificates, which in the U.S. context is generally CDs, would be, we develop a process that makes them social responsible investments, so SRIs, and to do that, we thought about, where can we really impact our world and our communities, and it's through, taking our members' deposits and funneling them into loans, like all credit unions do, and we wanted to, members to have some pride in what they are investing in, and so instead of taking an approach of carving out just a portion of the portfolio, we said, we think we can kind of start at the beginning and saying there's a screening approach, negative screenings and norms-based screening, that is the beginning stages of social responsible investment. We can kind of do that at the, for all of our commercial and agricultural loans. And then we can kind of start to move towards impact. So about 5 years ago, we implemented those screens. We did that with a technical partner, who then took kind of best practices from the social responsible investing mutual fund space, and said, these are the screens that are generally used. there's a wide variety. If any of you know about the social responsible investment space, you know that there's a wide variety of approaches. And so we looked at kind of what we thought would be best practices and applied 10 screens. Now we have an 11th screen. And so 6 of them are strongly inclusionary, exclusionary, where we don't fund the direct production of alcohol, tobacco, cannabis, weapons and military, gambling, pornography, or nuclear power. We would fund a portion of the distribution because that becomes quite complicated. If you think about like a convenience store, for example, that has to have a variety of different things. How do you not fund those kind of small enterprises? So we have some tolerance levels for that, and then the other pieces around the norms based. So in their sectors, how do they compare in terms of their environmental or human rights? We fund a lot of agriculture, so animal welfare is really important to us. How do those industries or businesses, how do they compare to their peers, and are they fulfilling the kinds of good things that we expect them to related to those things? And if not, then we can screen them out as well. It means that they wouldn't get lending from us. They could still be a member of ours, but they would really need to then improve their business practices before they could be qualify for a loan. So, and we're trying to then kind of extend that into more impact areas. So where are more progressive places in the economy of green power generation and affordable housing, we're just at the beginning stages of how we can kind of move towards that. But that excites me about how we can continue to evolve that screening approach and have a full book portfolio then that we can really transparently say it meets our screening criteria, and you can have real pride in investing at the retail level.
Thank you so much, Ben. Before we take questions from the audience, we have planned a little rapid fire round. I'll state the question and then I'll call on the panelists to answer it. And as we do this, please, if you have a question that you want to follow up on, I've heard about the socially responsible investment CDs. I've heard about carbon accounting financials. I've heard about investments in the portfolio and using special tools. What do you want to know? Please put your questions in the chat. Okay, here's the question. And panelists, I might take us in reverse order from what we started in terms of who speaks first. So in a short period of time, please talk about the top 2 factors that made it possible for your organization to dedicate the resources needed for the project you were talking about as being so passionate about. Ben, you went last first. How about going first now?
Yeah, I mean, I think the top 2 factors really are about having a common vision of what you want to achieve, and then having top level leadership that says go do it. We believe in this vision too. There's ideas that come from everywhere in an organization, and for leadership to hear and understand and share in that vision, and then empower those that have to make it happen, and really champion what you're going to do. It makes all the difference.
Thank you. I'm going to be very interested to see the connections between the perspectives that you each bring to this question. Paul, would you go next?
Sure. And to be honest, I'll say almost the same thing. The 2 things that really make this possible are first, a very clear strategy. This kind of work is central to our strategy developed by the staff and communicated to the staff. So everybody knows how this fits into what we're trying to do as an organization. And the second one is just very clear support from every level of management, board of directors, CEO, business line leads, all the way down. Everybody is on board with the mission, and that makes this kind of thing an easy sale inside.
It all starts with the mission. Melissa, what would you add?
All of the above, and we started at self-help. The ability to have a full-time expert working on this project actually bubbled up from the staff. And unless you have somebody who isn't dedicated full-time to doing everything else, Like if I had to also run the payroll, or if I was closing loans and had a big commitment there, I would not be able to be calculating carbon. So having the commitment to have somebody who's got bandwidth to do this and keep leading and keep pushing is a really important organizational commitment beyond the lip service and beyond putting line items in the strategic plan, or even putting goals in annual plans. And then the second thing that made this possible is that Self-Help has a robust and ongoing internship program. And a carbon footprint is an awesome summer intern project once you've got the system set up. And so we were able to tap into that, which means I didn't have to hire consultants. Apologies to any consultants who are in the room, but it's a lot easier sell to have a student work on the project, have them have some experience, get their feet wet in the field, and be on staff rather than writing a check to a consultant, no matter how awesome the consultant is.
So I've heard vision and mission, and I've heard leadership backing, executive endorsement, and I've heard, and staff it, put people behind it too. Rich, what would you add to the list?
Sure. Two things we were able to utilize here, and you mentioned it a little bit in your intro earlier, are the charitable donation accounts and employee benefit pre-funding portfolios that credit unions can deploy, or federal credit unions can deploy. They, not only do they support charities and support a credit union's own employees, but they also allow for an expansion to otherwise impermissible asset classes, including environmental and socially conscious securities issued by corporations. A notable example here are corporate bonds from bank and financial holding companies that are issued directly to support impact causes such as green lending and loans to low-income communities. Typically, these types of investment securities aren't permitted for federal credit unions' core investment portfolios. However, through these two accounts, a charitable donation account and employee pre-funding portfolio, they can be.
Marvelous. I'm sure Rich would be happy to talk more specifics about that. There's a shout out in the chat. It says, shout out on working with interns. I started with my credit union career as a self-help intern in 1994. Best thing that happened to me. So that's kind of cool connection, Melissa. And then we have another question for Ben. It says, do you know if were any specific regulatory framework changes in Canada that facilitated your program that we could advocate for in the US, or was it just driven by your purpose-driven mission statement that drove your efforts?
Yeah, I mean, it really was driven by us, and it's an extra layer of of risk and relationship than your regulator isn't really asking for it. But we think it strengthens our portfolio and our balance sheet by doing it, and so that's one reason to advocate for it. The better performance you'll have, if you actually kind of get rid of the bad actors. That's a fairly easy, kind of straightforward way to do, and you attract other good actors because of that approach. And conversations that we thought would be difficult in the lending environment, we then have to ask additional questions in the credit process. We thought we might get a little bit of pushback from businesses, but they actually really appreciated that we were asking those kinds of questions, because that demonstrated to them the kinds of things that we were interested in. And for the most part, it was pretty easy for them to say, no, I'm not involved in those things. So that's a good reason to advocate for it internally.
Thank you, Ben. We have another question in the chat from Miles. It says, if any of you work with CUNA Mutual for employee 401k programs, have you successfully deployed product options that are more value aligned in nature than classic offerings? I would imagine that this applies across vendors that would do 401k programs. Rich, is that something that you can address here?
Yeah, it's probably more my category. I mean, I can't speak specifically for CUNA Mutual, but in terms of a traditional 401k lineup, there are mutual funds that are geared more towards ESG type factors and focusing on those sorts of topics. But certainly credit unions could work with their investment advisors and retirement committees and retirement advisors to see if those types of funds are candidates for being added to the fund lined up for your credit union.
A little more advocacy, it sounds like. Ask, right? And encourage.
I'll actually speak to that, even though it's a U.S. context. In our kind of retirement programs, that those are the lead funds that we offer our employees. We actually don't talk about anything besides social responsible and more impact funds with them in the conversation. If they want other things, then they can go add them too. But we talk about those values ones first.
Wonderful. Thank you all very much for sharing your expertise with us today. It's been a pleasure to be the moderator, and thanks to our hosts. I'm going to sign off here and pass it back to Tom.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you, panelists. Again, really great conversations, kind of core to the financial aspects of the credit union, but also our mission and our values. So that's really important. And next, we're going to break out into actually one of the best parts of this whole summit is our ability to talk to each other, right? So we're going to be talking about sustainability journeys, and we're going to continue the conversations in our breakout rooms. And our aim is to discuss this kind of sustainable operations and products and services, the challenges of wins, anything that, or even if you just have questions about how to start your sustainability journey. So we're going to ask everybody, we're going to break out for about 10 minutes. We're going to ask everyone to select a spokesperson for your group. We're going to have to try to keep notes and keep time for about 10 minutes. And we're going to, when we come back, hopefully we can share with the rest of the group what you found. So I hope you all have some great conversations, and I'll turn it over to Saeed, who's our behind the scenes technical wizard, to break us out into our rooms. So continue the conversations, and we'll meet you back here in the main room to hear what you guys found, learn from each other. Looks like we're all back. So welcome back. Hopefully everyone had a really good conversation. We only have a few minutes to go through everything. I think we had 7 breakout rooms. So, and I was lucky enough to be in group 1, so I get to start. And I'm going to ask our group 1 spokesperson, Chris from Civic Federal Credit Union. Why don't you give us a quick 30 seconds or a minute on what you heard from the rest of our panelists. You can come on off mic then.
All right, guys, thanks for having me again, and I appreciate leading the discussion we just had. I'm going to start video real quick. Very briefly, some of the things that we learned from all the credit unions is, it's a mix of big and small projects, and also we talked some extensively about winning, mind share within your own employees. We talked about the big projects are very ambitious. From getting solar panels installed on your buildings to becoming LEED certified in your buildings, to having electric charging stations in your buildings. But to the smaller point, we were doing things like trying to eliminate single service water bottles at our facilities and at our member appreciation events and at the events that we all attend. So, it's going to be difficult to, like we said, walk the talk. And I think that was a common theme among all of us in our sustainability journeys. One final point that was made by Paul in our group was that, finance is a tool, but it's a tool that can really drive change. We didn't get really to explore that point a lot, but I wrote it down because I thought his statement was impactful. I think that that's something that we all need to realize when we're going through this is that, yeah, it's another tool, it's another quiver in the arrow, or it's another arrow in the quiver. But we can use that to advance the socially responsible change I think that we're all seeking on this call. So it was a great discussion, and I learned a lot just from talking to all of our peers here. This has been wonderful. And you were right when you said this might be one of the best sessions so far. I totally agree. Thanks for the time.
No worries. Thanks, Chris.
Yeah.
Group 2, you're up. I don't know if you nominated your spokesperson, but please let us know. Come on off the mic and off and on camera, if you don't mind.
Hi, Tom. This is Ash, and I believe we got so engaged in our conversation that we didn't stop and think of a spokesperson. But it was a great discussion, and we talked about sustainability journeys. Everything starts with one small step, but Also, we cannot separate green movement from global sustainability and the goals. We have social responsibility to our members, to the future, and to our staff. So that was our discussion. To continue to evolve and to continue on our journeys.
Gosh, I'm absolutely not at all upset to hear that. That you guys were so engrossed you didn't take notes. So that's what we want to hear. We do want to hear people connecting and having great conversations. That's really what part of this whole summit's about. Group 3, were you able to pick a spokesperson and come on off mic and on camera and let us know what you guys talked about? Group 3 was
I'm not sure if we were group 3, but in the group that Miles Hoffman facilitated wonderfully, I was the designated spokesperson. So if I can jump in here, I'll do that. Just to say that all the journeys that were shared were as varied and unique as each particular credit union, and a lot of good information shared. Over Premier Credit Union, big focus, Miles shared on expanding their sustainable offerings, in particular some of their lending programs at present, and also seeking ways for themselves as the credit union and their members to become more energy efficient. We had Alejandro from UIS Federal Credit Union. He serves as a volunteer for the credit union. And he was talking about, in terms of his own personal experience, he has an education, a master's degree in human rights, and just that he's, a champion of all things sustainable as a volunteer for the credit union, and specifically focusing on recycling. And he really appreciated what was shared in the other panel discussions for ways that OAS can do more types of environmentally minded investments. We had a really good contribution. John Jeffries is here today, the CEO of Callahan. And John shared that in 2018, Callahan became 100% employee owned. So a lot of the focus at Callahan now is about how they can really amplify their mission, their virtues, and be a really, truly purpose-driven organization. And so there's been a lot of focus on that and learning how to do that from some of the sessions we're sharing here. Jessica from Local Government Federal Credit Union, early on in their journey, and she's just here to listen and learn. But special emphasis for her is really how to make sustainability more accessible and more affordable for certain of the low-income communities. So we're going to connect her with Inclusive and NADA and have her take the program there. And for UNFCU, just for the group to know, we've been climate neutral since 2016. Current focus and emphasis on the goals up ahead are around innovation and leadership, and to continue to practice sustainable operations. And really, probably one of our biggest priorities is supporting the United in Sustainability Summit. We're very excited with everyone's participation thus far. Thank you.
Thank you, Pam. Yeah, I think for anyone, if the rest of the groups are shy, they're going to be pretty lucky because we don't have enough time to go through everyone. So if you want to, for the remaining groups, if you can post your any highlights into the chat, we would appreciate it. But I'm super happy to talk about the few things that I heard as a consistent, even from Chris at Civic about their values committee. I love that they rebranded their sustainability group to their values group. But most importantly, that what we heard was a lot of connections and communications being made here directly between resources and individuals throughout credit unions, throughout the credit union history. It's really what UIS is really trying to be. But also, as Pam alluded to, how far UNFCU is along, we're quite proud of that. And a really big part of that can really be attributed to our next speaker, Kimberly Kosmenko, the CEO of Kosmenko & Co. Certified B Corp. I think we just heard Ben from, I didn't even know credit unions, maybe it's a Canadian thing, could actually themselves become certified B Corps. Certified B Corp is certified by B Lab to maintain certain standards for social and quite strong standards for social environmental performance and accountability. Kimberly's been an outstanding resource to UNFCU since 2015. She's helped us define and implement our strategy I know that's something a lot of people are interested in, how they implement their journey. She's recognized as an expert in business integration of the SDGs. Kimberly had a big role in the early phase development of the UN Global Compact's and D Lab's SDG Action Manager. We're going to learn more about that. And that was a big collaboration with the Center of Ethics and Social Responsibility. And she also teaches graduate courses on sustainable business and leadership at the University of Colorado. So coming to us from Boulder, Kimberly will now lead our discussion on how credit unions can address the climate crisis, starting and accelerating your journey. Take it away, Kimberly, again.
Thank you, Tom. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. It is always such a pleasure to get to spend time with the credit union community. As Tom mentioned, I've had really the honor of getting to work with UNFCU for a number of years. And I'm thrilled to come in at this part of the summit when I know you're already sharing ideas on your sustainability journey, how you're moving forward. And my goal in our next 20 minutes together is to give you some concrete steps on how your credit union, given the unique mission and position and type of organization that credit unions are, how credit unions can specifically address the climate crisis. So let's go. And I've got with me, I'm really fortunate to have one of my graduate students who is also interning with Kosmenko and Co. Teresa Blackwell is in the wings and running slides for us. So Teresa, if you'd be willing to screen share that first slide, we can start diving in. Thankful to have you here. I want to be able to give you all some specific steps that can help you to start or accelerate your journey taking action on the climate crisis. And so as you'll see as Teresa starts getting these slides up, what I want to go through today, I've got a brief agenda for you. First, let's get grounded in some of the climate impacts that we know our communities are facing. And I know we've been discussing over the past few days, particularly as we come to the conclusion of COP26. So we'll start there. Then we'll move into how do you prioritize your focus areas for your sustainability and impact action holistically, including your social impact and your equity work. Then we'll get into how you set up data-driven action and ultimately ambitious climate goals that are going to have a meaningful movement towards climate. So Teresa, if you could bring us to the slide that says the latest climate science. I just griffed the first couple of slides where we're getting that set up. Perfect. Thanks so much, Teresa. I'm going to recap a few things that I think have been part of the conversation already today, which is where we are at with the latest climate science coming out of IPCC. As we move out of COP26, we know that at this moment in time, when you look globally at the commitments that nations have made, we're in the trajectory of roughly 2.5 up to 3 degrees Celsius of warming worldwide. And what you're looking on this slide, which may actually feel like a familiar graphic as we move through COP26, are the different potential scenarios for what warming could look like globally. On the left, you see what we would consider to be our best case scenario, 1.5 degrees Celsius of warming worldwide. And you see a bit of a heat map of where around the world that's going to affect folks the most, particularly in areas of the poles and some areas that we know are areas that are struggling economically as well as with climate. On the right side, in that darker shade, you see what the 4 degrees Celsius change scenario looks like. Now, because I want to get you to specific actions for a credit union, I'm not going to unpack all of the details of these scenarios, but I do want to make sure that we've got it really grounded in our mind going into this discussion, that if we go all the way to that 4 degrees Celsius warming scenario, that is our worst case scenario on our current trajectory. We will see cascading crop failures. We will see catastrophic extreme weather events, heat waves, heavy rain, drought, tropical cyclone cycles, expanding the range of deadly diseases, additional pandemics, and higher risk of pandemics moving between natural areas and the human environment as we lose biodiversity. It's a pretty dire scenario, and it's part of what brings us here together to know that we together as a community can move this trajectory, and that's what we're looking towards. So we need to take action now. Next slide. And we're seeing this in our communities. I know we've got folks here coming to us, joining us from California. As you may already, you are 8 of the 10 largest wildfires in California history have happened since 2016, just the past 5 years. So quantitatively, we know that we've had 3,000 miles of California that has burned just in 2021, just this year, 3,000 miles. And that has affected 3,000 homes, commercial properties, other structures as these fires move through the state. We also know, because we're here with a concern about sustainability, is that this has a real human impact on our communities, on the people who are losing homes, and the people who are losing cherished natural areas. People are losing in businesses that they've invested hard in over the years, as well as dangerous levels of air pollution across the country. And because as a credit union community, we know that being connected to members and serving those members is such a part of a mission for credit unions, this is both a human tragedy in addition to a climate tragedy that we know is affecting folks within our community. Next slide. One of the things that hasn't actually made the news as much as it probably should is the level of flooding that we have seen in Baton Rouge and surrounding areas over the past year, as we've had catastrophic weather events that have impacted these areas that are in vulnerable floodplains. Something that's important to keep in mind is not only have we seen those impacts to communities who have lost as well homes and businesses, much like our neighbors in California, we also know that if we reach that 4 degrees Celsius warming scenario, that areas such as Baton Rouge, areas such as New Orleans are at extremely high risk of permanent flooding, which means permanent loss of those communities, the community ties, human connections, and the history and cultural heritage that comes with that part of our country here in the US. And I start with these scenarios because I want to really ground us in the human and natural impacts that we're looking at and why we want to act so urgently. Now, because we've got a credit union community here, there's a couple of responsibilities that we all have to really act on climate. The first is to be able to leverage what our role is as financial institutions dedicated to the community, to be able to look at the financial impacts of climate change and how the specific services and offerings that we as a community offer can address these. And I say we because I feel really connected to the work of credit unions. It's really been a pleasure to be part of this community as a consultant. And then the second piece is to be able to address climate change and mitigate it as quickly as possible. And as we go forward, next slide, please. As we move forward in this presentation, what I'll be giving you is the specific steps that you can take over the coming months to be able to genuinely move forward with urgency and see that climate action is making a difference within your credit union. Next slide. Now let's talk about what you should be working on operationally within your organization. Steps that I know some of you are working towards and some are just getting ready to go on this part of the journey. The first step is what we call going through a materiality process, which is a way of saying, looking at your particular credit union, at the way you operate, at the impacts you have environmentally and socially within the community, at the areas that you're able to make a difference in, and to be able to identify the different areas of environmental and social governance issues that your credit union can have the most impact on, that are most important to your business and most important to your community. What this process does is it helps you sort through all of the potential sustainability and impact and social responsibility actions that you might take and to find the ones that are most important. Next slide. The UN recommends that we go through a process that's called principled prioritization. And what principled prioritization means is that you look at 2 pathways to be able to take action that will have additional movement, new actions towards sustainability and impact. The first, which is called Path A, is looking within your operations to seek opportunities to both reduce climate impact and to create positive impact in the operations that are part of your day-to-day work within the credit union. The second, Path B, is to be able to find products, services, and investments that you're able to offer that will make an additional contribution to moving the needle on positive climate action. So what the UN and the Global Reporting Initiative recommend is for us to be looking both at operational changes and in products and services that we can bring out to address the climate crisis. Next slide. For most credit unions, the list of topics on this slide are going to be the top tier level of topics that you're going to want to take action on towards sustainability. You see climate and greenhouse gas emissions right at the top. We'll talk more about that. In addition to that, energy, paper use, because this industry by necessity and by law can frequently be very paper intensive. Sustainable investments, where you're putting the money that's being invested in a variety of different investment vehicles. Purchasing and supply chain, staff total compensation, diversity and inclusion, and member and staff education around what it means to be able to be sustainable and take action. These are common themes. Now, your credit union may find that based on your particular community and mission, your list and your order may look a little bit different than this, but this is a fairly common set of material topics within the credit union industry. Next slide. When you've got that list, my next recommendation is to look at how you can bring sustainability into your strategic planning. So in all likelihood, your credit union has an existing annual strategic planning process with existing goals and KPIs that you've got set up that your management teams are looking at. One of the best ways to make sure that sustainability and social impact genuinely moves forward within your credit union is to figure out how you can align that sustainability strategy into your annual strategic development process and have those KPIs be part of the credit union's work as a whole. And with that, setting very clear and transparent quantitative and qualitative baselines for how your performance is now, where you'd like to get your performance to, which goals you'd like to set, and tracking that progress year after year after year in a visible way internally and in your external reporting. Next slide. And the next step, as we get very deeply into more of this very specific climate-oriented action, is doing your greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Now, some of you may already have this done. You may have been doing an inventory for a while. For some folks on the call, you may be early in your journey, and this may be your first opportunity to learn about what a GHG inventory looks like. What a GHG inventory does is it is able to quantify your climate impact by looking at the various sources of greenhouse gas emissions within your operations, such as electricity, natural gas, vehicle usage, refrigerant usage, and that's both within your direct operations and within your value chain. So let's look at that just a bit more in the next slide. What you're seeing on the screen right now is a graphic from the GHG protocol, which is a globally recognized center of guidance for how to appropriately do GHG accounting. On this slide, I'm not going to go through every little detail in here, but I'm certainly happy to share this with folks that are interested. On this slide, what you're seeing is that there's different what are called scopes of emissions, scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3, based on the type of emissions and whether they come from your direct operations, from upstream or downstream of your organization. Scope 1 is direct emissions. Scope 2 is your electricity emissions, so those are within your operations. Scope 3 are emissions within your business activities and value chain that aren't within the four walls of your direct operations. So let me give you a few examples. Business travel, purchasing, loan activities. Those are different areas of scope 3 emissions where your decisions within the credit union will have an impact on emissions, but you don't have direct management control. In the past, we would focus more heavily on scope 1 and scope 2, those emissions within your operations. Now what we're finding as with the climate crisis gets even more urgent is that the need to look at those scope 3 or those value chain emissions is becoming even more urgent. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about how we do that as we move to the next slide. Where we need to be able to address the climate crisis ultimately is climate neutrality by 2050. That's what the IPCC science is telling us for our organizations. So what does climate neutrality mean? Climate neutrality means no net additional climate impact. Now there's quite a bit of detail within the IPCC science in terms of the scenarios and how we have different targets. And I'm not going to get into all of the details of that for this brief presentation. But for the purposes of our work here within this conversation, know that in the overall trajectory, whereas climate neutrality used to be a reach goal for a lot of organizations, we're now seeing it very rapidly become a baseline goal for businesses and for organizations that are truly committed to climate. So on the next slide, let's look at what the steps are towards climate neutrality. The first one is to be able to reduce your emissions from your direct operations. And that means some of the things that I know you're already familiar with: reducing energy use, reducing natural gas use, having more efficient buildings, going to those LEED green building certifications, reducing business travel, looking at your work from home emissions. So those are some of the things that are common and familiar in a lot of the credit union space. And then it involves going even deeper than that and trying to get really creative in how you can identify and minimize emissions within your overall operations. Then move to your value chain emissions. How can you evaluate them, quantify them, and minimize them? In doing this, step 3 is genuinely decreasing your reliance on fossil fuels and transitioning to renewable energy as quickly as possible. That can involve renewable energy on site. It can involve local renewable energy, such as shared solar farms. And then we'll talk a little bit in the next couple of slides about how you can use renewable energy credits and verified emission offsets to mitigate the emissions that can't be directly eliminated through your activities to become more efficient. Next slide. Within these conversations, we often hear about RECs and offsets, renewable energy credits, RECs, verified emissions reductions or offsets, as ways to mitigate climate impact. And I find that a lot of people are familiar with the general idea that these are vehicles to be able to look at your overall emissions and to be able to have a mitigation measure. But I get a lot of questions as to what are they really? Are they reputable? How do I know what it is that I'm buying when I'm doing this? So I want to take a minute to talk about these two options. First, renewable energy credits are a market-based instrument to be able to demonstrate that electricity has been generated from renewable energy sources. And here's a little bit about how it works. You may be familiar that we've got phenomenal wind energy resources in Texas, for example. Not the only location, but a major source of wind, back up 3 seconds, a major opportunity for wind generated renewable energy. So let's say, for example, that we've got a development of a new wind energy facility in Texas that is producing energy that's going directly into the grid in Texas. There's two commodities that actually come out of that. One commodity is the direct energy that goes into the grid and can serve homes and businesses within that region. The other commodity is actually the environmental attributes of that, the reduction in overall emissions by shifting from fossil fuel to a renewable product. And that environmental attribute becomes the renewable energy credit that can be either held onto by the developer of that wind power plant, or it can be sold on the open market to organizations such as yourselves that are interested in reducing your overall climate emissions. So that's a renewable energy credit. Then a verified emissions offset or verified emissions reduction or an offset is also a market-based vehicle that's able to move investment from individuals or organizations that want to see reductions in carbon emissions into a specific project that is able to do that reduction. So think about things such as reforestation or methane capture, projects that would reduce overall emissions. Now, there's good RECs and bad RECs, there's good offsets and bad offsets. And it's likely that a lot of folks in this audience have heard some of the bad press about doing this types of offset work. So I want to give you a couple of tips of, as you're going down this path, to ensure that you're doing it with integrity and getting RECs and offsets that are genuinely being net positive and getting you what it is that you're looking for. And so on the slide right now, you can see an abbreviated but not at all exhaustive list of what some of the options are to look for both certification. Oh, looks like we've got someone who might have gone off mute. I heard a little background noise. For a couple of options to be able to ensure that you've got verification. So for RECs, you want to look for Green E certification if you're getting US-based RECs. That shows that those are verified. If you're looking at offsets, American Carbon Registry and Gold Standard are two places to be able to look to say, have these been verified? Now, being part of the United Nations community here, another really good opportunity is to go to the United Nations Climate Neutral Now platform, which has UN vetted projects that you can invest in to do carbon offsets in alignment with the Sustainable Development Goals and the UN's goals. So again, not an exhaustive list, but the take home from this, in addition to have a few sources to get more information, is to ensure that if you're getting RECs and offsets to move towards climate neutrality, that you are doing so with ones that have been vetted and verified by a reputable third-party organization. Next slide. There's quite a bit of movement building happening across the business sector towards climate neutrality. There's organizations such as SME Climate Hub for small and mid-sized businesses that are trying to gather together collectively to set strong climate goals in alignment with the IPCC. Likewise, We Mean Business, which works with both large and small businesses. Kosmenko and Co is actually a signatory on that one as well. There's also the Science-Based Target Initiative, which is designed to ensure that targets for climate reduction and climate neutrality are genuinely transparent, following the latest science, and can be verified to be able to have appropriate emissions impacts. So let's go to the next slide and talk a little bit more about the Science-Based Target Initiative. SBT, science-based targets, are the gold standard of where we need to be for emissions reductions work. What you're seeing right now is a graphic from the IPCC, again, showing different climate scenarios that can happen based on how well or how poorly we reduce emissions over the coming years. What an SBT does is it creates a, back up a little bit. I actually want to go bring a little bit of new information there before I go into describing the calculation, the SBT. So last month, the Science-Based Target Initiative launched the Net Zero Corporate Standard. And I've talked a little bit about climate neutrality so far, but up until recently, despite the goals towards climate neutrality, how those were counted and defined was largely set either by organizations themselves or third-party organizations that they might work with to be able to do their emissions inventory and to be able to do offsets. There's a real need for transparency on whether net zero targets are reputable. And in alignment with that, the Science-Based Targets Initiative has launched the Net Zero Corporate Standard to be able to meet the needs of deep decarbonization that reduces emissions by 90 to 95% by 2050 to be able to stay in alignment with the 1.5 degrees Celsius change scenario from the IPCC. And in order to have that level of deep decarbonization, and by decarbonization, I mean decoupling economic and business activity from fossil fuels and moving towards carbon-free sources. In order to have that level of deep decarbonization, we need to look within our organizations and within the value chain, that scope 3 area that we started talking about. And so the Science-Based Target Initiative is a way to have very specific parameters on how emissions are measured, how climate neutrality is measured, and to be able to have very strong public transparency on the goals, the calculations, the progress towards those goals, in order to ensure that when a goal goes out there, when it gets published in a sustainability report, in a blog, in a press release, that it's genuine and it can be trustworthy to ensure that we're making the progress we need to do. Now, there have been banks and financial institutions that have signed on. This is a relatively new initiative that's gaining momentum fast, but it's still on the leading edge. At this moment in time, SBTs are geared towards for-profit businesses, and here in the US, credit unions are nonprofits. In all likelihood, we're going to move into nonprofits over time, so SBTs can be seen as guidance to make sure going along the way, and to a resource to be able to get there. At the moment, a lot of the focus in getting SBTs out there has been in the larger corporate space. So I want to make sure you're aware of that, as the place we need to go, and as standards that are going to ensure that if you're moving towards climate neutrality, which I hope is a goal that you're either working on or considering, that you've got the resources to make sure that you're doing it with really strong integrity. Next slide. As we're hitting our final moments of time, let's recap. First step in order to move towards your climate journey is principal prioritization of your material issues, aligning with the strategic planning process, conducting your greenhouse gas inventory, achieving climate neutrality, choosing reputable and verified RECs and offsets to get to climate neutrality, and trying to move towards science-based targets. And for our final slide coming up, a few words to leave you with from another of the graduate students I have an opportunity to work with at University of Colorado Boulder. And Red said, climate action is a problem on the plate of every living being on the planet. What are you willing to change to be part of the transition? And that's what today is about. What are you and your credit union willing and ready to do to be able to help us meet the goals that we need to make to avoid the worst impacts of climate change? With that, next slide. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you to UNFCU and OAS for inviting me and allowing me to speak. Thank you for the work you're doing on sustainability, and have a phenomenal day.
Thank you, Kimberly. And again, as I mentioned, thank you for being such an incredible resource to UNFCU. And I'm sure, you will get you connected with a lot of people who are universally saying that they, would like some assistance on their own sustainability journey. And speaking of assistance on your sustainability journey, we're going to talk next about the SDG Action Manager, right? We've talked a lot about the SDGs in some way in our conversations throughout the day. And just to recap, that the SDGs are 17 global objectives dedicated to solving the world's social, economic, environmental issues, probably the go-to reference point that are adopted throughout the sustainability industry. As an impact management solution, the SDG Action Manager enables organizations to really assess where they are across the key across these key sustainability principles. UNFCU, we're undertaking a baseline review of these findings, and trust us, we are even surprised. I don't know if many of you know, I actually work primarily in cybersecurity, and I know frameworks are super helpful to make sure we're living to, not missing anything. And I think the SDG Action Manager really helps organizations understand the same thing in terms of sustainability. Here to take us on a tour of the Action Manager is Kells. She's a Senior Manager of Corporate Engagement at the United Nations Global Compact. And having worked nearly a decade in corporate sustainability, and more specifically on anti-corruption and transparency in government affairs, Claire's current focus is on sustainability metrics. And what luck, Claire, we're delighted that you can join us and discuss this really helpful tool. So Claire, I'll turn it over to you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. And I'm so glad I got to catch the end of Kimberly's presentation. So critical to be making very rigorous and ambitious climate action. So I can't amplify that enough. Anyway, so on to the SDG Action Manager to help companies tackle a holistic approach to sustainability. So I'll go ahead and share my screen. I do have just a few introductory slides, but then hopefully I'll be able to share a view of the manager itself. So this is important because really right now the world is not on track to meet the Sustainable Development Goals, right? As noted, there are a set of 17 goals that the UN member states have adopted. So all governments of the world have adopted these, and now it's the role of every other sector of society, including business, to play their part. So you can see here a few key statistics about where there's gaps between the ambition of the SDGs and where we are in reality. And the SDGs have a 15-year time period, 2015 to 2030. And right now, the estimates say we would achieve the SDGs in our current trajectory by 2090, which is not acceptable. So more action is needed from all sectors, but again, especially business. And so here's one tool that might be able to help. So I mentioned, the need for ambition and scale. We can see here that, a large number of companies are taking action generally on the Sustainable Development Goals. But are those goals enough? Are they aligned with societal and environmental needs? Is corporate strategy aligned? Are business models, products, and services really aligned? Or is it just sort of at the top level, but not really all the way down through the business? So, that kind of next level of action is needed. And so the Global Compact partnered with B Lab. So if you're familiar with the B Corps certification, sort of imprimatur, that's developed by B Lab. And in order to get B Corps certification, you need to take an assessment. And so the Global Compact partnered with B Lab to develop a tool where companies could really review, an integrated set of globally accepted best practices on sustainability, right? So not just environment, but human rights, labor, anti-corruption, and of course, environment. And so companies who are, engaging both with UN Global Compact or B Corp can use this tool. So the SDG Action Manager is a web-based online tool where your company can create a profile and really, check out if you align with some best practices by working through a series of modules on some fundamentals as well as each of the 17 SDGs. It's basically a great tool to help you with that self-assessment. What is your baseline? Where are you right now? And where might you want to get to based on some of those best practices? So if you're here and you want to get there, you can identify some actions to help make progress and even use the tool to set some of those goals and track them. So like I said, it's a great tool to sort of set that baseline. Where are you now? What's your current impact? And share that impact. So while all data provided in the tool is confidential, there are ways you can share that, both internally and externally should you want to. You can set goals and track your progress towards meeting those goals, and you can collaborate. So you might be the focal point to set up your company's profile, but you can invite others to collaborate. So, we know sustainability is cross-functional and should be embedded throughout business. So it's a great way to bring on other colleagues working on different areas of responsibility and sustainability. All right, so let's jump into what the tool looks like. All right. Let me just switch screens now. All right, so this is what the tool looks like when you're logged in. I've set up a sort of dummy company, but once you create your company's profile, this is the navigation bar, and basically the tools itself, as I said, offers modules on each of the 17 SDGs, as well as sort of a baseline assessment that's aligned to some basic sustainability principles and norms and values. So you could view and complete each one of these modules. Now the tool does, based on your company's sector and size, it does recommend particular modules to focus on or maybe start with. So you can help that to kind of focus your efforts, but you can use it for every module. So if we go in here and look, you can see there's about 38 questions, and based on how you respond to those questions, you'll get a score that indicates potential risk related to this set of goals. So some basic questions about your company, your industry, alignment. So some basic baseline here, and then covers all of the core issue areas of the Global Compact: human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. So those fundamentals. So this, might come across as a lot of questions, but this baseline module does help answer other questions, right? So of course, if you're answering something about human rights in the baseline, if you go into poverty, it might help already answer some of the questions here. So there is integration between the modules. So, you just go into each module and respond to the questions, and it provides this, this score. And then based on that, you can get some reports about your company. You can align to goals, right? So if you identify that you want to start paying all direct employees a living wage, you can set this up as a goal in here that you can collaborate with your colleagues on to bring them in, and everyone agree that this is the right goal for your company to set. Let's take a look at reports. And so this shows, each of the modules, once completed, of course, how you would measure up and, what's remaining. So, other areas where maybe, your company is recommended to take further action. So overall, it's just a, a great online tool to help sort of understand where you are currently, and, help identify goals to take action on, so you can maximize your positive impact, minimize your negative impact, and then collaborate and start taking action to those goals. So that's a very quick, brief look at the SDG Action Manager. But I think happy to answer any questions that there might be from the crowd, as well as happy to share those overview slides as well. I will.
I do have two quick questions. I know we are running a little late, as my Zoom failed to the chat noted. We're running a few minutes behind. So I do have really quick. Do you have to be a member of the UN Global Compact to use this tool?
No, it's absolutely free and available to the public. And I'll just drop the link right here in the chat. And you're welcome to go ahead and start using it.
And is anything that is submitted, is that at all publicly accessible to anyone other than the submitter? Is it private to the organization that's using the tool?
Yes, all data is confidential. There are ways to export information if you want to share that in any way. But if you're just using it within your company, absolutely confidential.
Clear. Thank you so much. I know we're kind of rushing along now, but again, SDG Action Manager is a fantastic tool, and something that I think anybody can use to help you kind of help yourself think about your alignment and your progress on sustainability and your alignment to the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you so much for sharing it with us, and UN Global Compact for developing it along with BLAB.
You're very welcome.
Thank you. And again, I apologize. I know we're running late, so we're going to try to move as quick as I can. I'd love to talk a little bit, introduce our next speaker, Cynthia. Oh, hopefully you can hear me. Cynthia is from 2021 to 2022 the UNA USA Youth Observer to the United Nations. In her role, Cynthia is traveling across the country, speaking and engaging Americans about the importance of the UN and spending a great deal of time with youth, and exactly the type of young person we are interested in the credit union movement to be attracting and connecting with. And we would love to be able to see our values. So Cynthia, thank you for stopping by to share your perspectives on the incredible youth movement that is leading the way on climate action and human rights and so many other the important social movements of our time. And we even saw, I think we saw it earlier today about the kind of protests in Glasgow, and I think a lot of youth leadership there. So Cynthia, can you provide us a quick update of the youth movement and the perspective of younger generations in this moment?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Tom. And hi, everyone. My name is Cynthia Yu, and I'm the 10th U.S. Youth Observer to the United Nations, a program of the UNA USA. I want to begin by answering that prompt and telling the story of a young woman from Baton Rouge. At the beginning of my term as the Youth Observer, I conducted a virtual listening tour where I personally spoke with and met with hundreds of U.S. youth who told me their stories. There's one in particular that really struck a chord with me. She hopped onto the call and said, "Cynthia, I'm so sorry that my camera's off. There's an incoming hurricane in my area, and I'm currently in the car trying to get away from this." It was the first thing she said to me during my listening tour, and I'm heartbroken to say that it wasn't the first or last story I heard about how the climate crisis has shattered our lives. Climate change has ripped our world apart, leaving no person, place, or purpose behind as it set our world aflame. These are just some of the stories I heard. a college junior from the Southeast whose home is 3 feet underwater, a high school sophomore from California who watched as a wildfire swept through her home, a young indigenous boy from the Arctic who lost 9 friends in the span of 5 months because they had fallen through the melted ice. 9 friends in the span of 5 months. Though some still deny it, I and the rest of our nation's youth can say with certainty that the climate crisis is the greatest threat we face today. And while I heard the stories of young people who had faced consequences of the climate crisis during my listening tour, I also heard about how young people are transforming ideas into impact through youth climate advocacy. Whether we're marching for progress outside of the halls of COP26 or actively asking our leaders to take climate action, Generation Z has spearheaded the largest climate activism movement in history. Today, I'm here to speak about why our advocacy is more crucial than ever, and I'm calling upon our world's youth to continue serving as champions for climate action amidst a world of disarray for 3 key reasons: urgency, capacity, and diversity. First, urgency. This past August, the IPCC released a report that showed us what we've known for years. We are in a code red for humanity. And while it may have shocked other generations, it certainly didn't shock mine. Generation Z inherited a world broken and torn apart by the compounding aftermath of environmental degradation. A survey conducted by the UN Environmental Program found that some 89% of youth respondents said that young people can make a difference on climate change. It's what we're seeing at home right now as well. Nearly 40% of all participants during my US listening tour named climate action as the top priority we should all address. And all participants noted that their local advocacy for the UN SDGs directly or indirectly tackles the climate crisis. The fire isn't next door anymore. It's right in our backyards, and that is why we must unite together to extinguish it. Second, capacity. Young people comprise about 1/4 to 1/3 of the world's entire population. The UN has already recognized the unique agency that young people have in the fight for our planet, stating that youth constitute the majority of the population in many countries and have an increasingly strong social and environmental awareness, which has the power to transform our societies toward a low carbon and climate resilient future. We have the capacity in numbers and technological capabilities, unlike ever before, to take action, and we must use this to our advantage as change makers for a better world. And then third, diversity. We need to face the facts. Centuries of exploitation, colonialism, and imperialism built an unequal world in which poorer countries, many of which are in the global south, are bearing the greatest brunt of climate change's consequences. In short, the most systemically disadvantaged individuals are often the most vulnerable ones when it comes to the climate crisis. And yet, BIPOCs and socioeconomically disadvantaged youth are often the least likely to have their voices heard in the global system. As our world's youth, we need to work together to elevate the voices of those who are facing the consequences tenfold every single day. As the climate crisis is a global and systemic issue, we can only fight it if we stand side by side with everyone to plan it forward for our planet. Our advocacy is all the more important because we are the greatest stakeholders in what happens to our planet. And we must continue fighting for change. Never again should anyone have to flee from a preventable disaster caused by climate. Never again should leaders remain indifferent to catastrophes next door. Never again should future generations have to inherit a world set aflame. The UNFCU has committed to investing in a cleaner, more sustainable future. They have taken a step forward. Now it's time to take ours. Right now, you can head to this link or scan the QR code on the screen to join me in the fight for climate action with the UNA USA. Join our movement for a better tomorrow, starting today. And furthermore, I call on our world leaders to invite us into the rooms where decisions are being made. The climate crisis needs to be addressed by those of us who are the greatest stakeholders and where the stakes are the highest. Young people have long been treated as accessories, giving input in the hopes of affecting the decision-making and deals being struck. I want to call on all with the power to do so to build solutions around, not adjacent to, the ideas and needs of youth who will need to call this planet home for the decades to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Cynthia. And I hope we as a credit union industry are really expressing to the young people our alignment to their values and how, you know, we would be like a great place to come and have your financial life that really is trying to reflect the values that are so important to young people, and that you guys, you know, find a home in the credit union industry for your services, you know, for where you can bank with their values too. So thank you so much for that. And to wrap it up, I know everyone, we're 5 minutes over already, so it's great, but we've had great insights, especially from community impact and sort of the values-based approach of credit unions. And it's a privilege right now for me to welcome Carlos Calderon, Chief Executive Officer and President of the Organization of American States Federal Credit Union, also known as UIS FCU, our very close partner today. Carlos, what are your thoughts on today? What are your kind of key takeaways, and what can we look forward to tomorrow's summit?
Thank you, Tom. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for participating in the 4th United in Sustainability Summit. As Michael Spink said today, thank you to the dreamers at UNFCU for making the summit a reality. We hope you have enjoyed the first day of this summit, or maybe for some of you, your first day on your journey towards sustainability. I bet that your heads are filled with ideas and things that you can do, stemming from all the information you gleaned today. It is such a rush. The day began with a warm welcome from Tom Kurian, who brought up the importance of social justice. And Tom, you did a great job as our MC today. Thank you. Yma Gordon read with the opening remarks on the importance of corporate social responsibility. And what about Cassie Flynn? Wow, what an amazing report from the COP26 in Glasgow, She highlighted the importance of understanding the detriment to the globe if we reach 1.5 degrees of global warming and beyond. I just cannot imagine the oceans without the beautiful coral reefs. Can you? That was an awakening for many of us on how close we are of reaching the point of no return. But it is definitely a call to action for all of us. Then we got into the strategies for bringing new green products and services to the market, cultivating the power of a difference in diversity, equity, and inclusion, progress and trends, and impact investing for economic and social good. These sessions were full of examples of ideas, products and services, and programs that credit unions have already implemented and are offering. The development, the diversity, equity, and inclusion trends, and the power of difference in various examples of impact investment from practitioners. It's clear that all of this can be done and has been done. Then we delved in the sustainability journey, and we discussed how credit unions can address the climate crisis, starting and accelerating your journey, an activity tour, the SDG action on SDGs, and very powerful hearing the youth call to action on the SDGs. That was very critical. It shows that regardless where you are in your sustainability journey, you are not alone. And there are so many examples of successful programs and others that have done that already and can support you. So how do we bring everything from this summit so far to our world? It is the right thing for the planet, of course, but also it is the right approach towards the long-term sustainability of credit unions and the programs today illustrated. In our journey towards sustainability, we can create a whole new line of business at our institutions. And most importantly, we can engage the new generations of members that are engaged with the sustainability of the planet. Tomorrow will be another exciting and transforming day, with sessions designed to show more of what's already in place and more examples of successful activities on DEI, discussions on socioeconomic impact of climate change in marginalized communities, resilience stories from credit unions in areas affected with climate change like Louisiana, Puerto Rico, California, pandemic and social justice impact on credit unions, and then measuring your sustainability programs. I would like to close with what Lao Tzu, an ancient Chinese philosopher, said: the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. So let's take all the steps in this journey together and make a difference in the planet. I hope you have a great afternoon. We'll see you all tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Carlos. Please come back tomorrow and have a great day, guys. Thank you.